Shanks is not who you think he is. Shanks might secretly be the most politically dangerous character in One Piece, more than Emu, more than the Gorosei, more than Blackbeard, to which I say yes, the chill red-haired guy who laughs at sea monsters might actually be the final boss of world politics, and we've all been looking at him the wrong way, because the fandom image of Shanks is kind of hilariously simple. He's the cool Yonko mentor. He's Luffy's pirate dad. He's the good guy who stopped the war. He shows up twice a decade, drops a line about betting it on the new era, and the internet explodes into memes and power-scaling charts. And to be fair, Oda absolutely plays into that. He literally designed Shanks to be effortlessly likable red hair, cool coat missing arm, tragic backstory done. But here's an interesting thing. Every time Shanks quietly walks through the story, the world shakes in really suspicious ways. God Valley happens, Roger somehow wins, and then just casually finds a baby in a treasure chest. That baby grows up on the Pirate King ship, learns the true history, maybe sees Laugh Tale, then just happens to be present when the the not Gomu fruit gets stolen and ends up in Luffy's stomach. Ace goes after Blackbeard. The Whitebeard pirates march to Marineford, and who strolls in at the exact frame where the entire power system is about to collapse. Red-haired Shanks ending the war on his terms. Later, he's in Mary Joa's having a respectful meeting with the Gorosei, a room where normal Yonko get erased from history for even thinking about walking in, and they're like, oh, you come talk about a certain pirate. This is the core idea we want to dig into. Shanks is not just a strong guy with good vibes. He's sitting at the intersection of pirate history, celestial dragon politics, and the future of the world. And his kindness might actually be a calculated way to preserve a very specific version of balance, the three great powers, the Yonko system, the Marines, the warlords, all quietly stabilized by the red-haired man who never overplays his hand. So in this video, we're going to pull that thread. We'll go back to God Valley and that treasure chest and ask what kind of child needs to be hidden, like stolen loot during the Rocks era. We'll talk about the Figarland theory and why Film Red keeps whispering celestial dragon without saying it. We'll look at his absurd political access to the Gorosei, the hidden layers of his strength, and the darker consequences of his choices in Luffy's story. Because as far as long-term setups go, Shanks might be Oda's most carefully loaded Chekhov's gun. And I want to emphasize, we are not treating him as a meme or a lazy hype tool. We're treating him as a deliberate narrative weapon Oda has been hiding in plain sight. And it all starts with that one bizarre detail. Roger opens a chest on God Valley and finds a baby. Why is a child being smuggled like contraband during the single worst day of celestial dragon history? And who exactly was so terrified of that baby they had to lock Shanks away like treasure? The treasure chest baby, reframing Shanks' origin story. So, let's zoom in on that chest, because as far as bizarre One Piece images go, Roger opening loot and finding a baby is top tier. This isn't just Phanon anymore. Oda confirmed in an SBS that, yes, Shanks was found as a baby in a treasure chest after God Valley. Film Red then doubles down on that same origin, adds the Figarland name, and Oda literally called the movie canon adjacent, which is anime code for I signed off on this, don't sue me if I tweak it later. And to be fair, we do have to separate the layers here. Manga canon. Roger found baby Shanks in a chest after God Valley. Movie adjacent canon. That baby is apparently tied to a Figarland family with celestial dragon vibes, Oda-approved aura. The guy who casually walks into the room of authority and chats with the Gorosei is probably not just some freckled orphan from East Blue. So the chest isn't a cute gag, it's a narrative crime scene. Because look at the context. God Valley is not some random island with a discount treasure hunt. This is Rocks D, Zebek going full, delete the aristocracy, while celestial dragons and their slaves are gathered for a hunting competition, which is already the most on-brand evil rich people activity imaginable. Garp and Roger are there. The incident is so scandalous, the island's name is erased from maps and history. This is Enia's lobby levels of cover-up, but for an entire landmass. Now, in that environment, crawling with world nobles, guards, slaves, and political Avi IPs, why is a baby in a chest? If this kid is a normal celestial dragon child, you don't lock him in a box like cursed jewelry. You parade him, register him, slap a bubble helmet on his head, and let him order slaves around. You certainly don't stash him like contraband and hope Roger doesn't roll a natural 20 on perception. So we land on two main possibilities. Option 1, high-value hostage. Some faction, rocks, rogue marines, revolution-adjacent weirdos, kidnaps a noble child and hides him in a chest to move him past security. Shanks is basically political ransom with tiny eyebrows. Option 2, forbidden child. His bloodline is so dangerous that even being seen is a problem, so someone smuggles him out like a devil fruit the Tenryubito aren't supposed to own. I want to emphasize how different that is. Hostage Shanks is leverage against power. Forbidden Shanks is power the system itself refuses to acknowledge. And here's an interesting thing. That dangerous child motif keeps showing up. Ace, hidden because of Roger. Luffy, carrying Nika's fruit. Shirahoshi, literally Poseidon. Toki's descendants, walking time capsules of the void century. People like to act like this is a late-game obsession, to which I say Oda was doing prototype versions in the Rocks era. Shanks might be the earliest instance of a kid whose very existence threatens the political balance. So, if Shanks was worth hiding in a chest at God Valley, who exactly was he being hidden from? And who wanted him erased so badly that they didn't just bury the baby, they buried the entire island? God Valley, the crime scene behind Shanks' birth. So let's zoom out and actually look at the crime scene where this baby in a box shows up, because as far as One Piece disasters go, God Valley is the prototype final saga incident. Canonically, we know 3 things. The Rocks pirates attacked the celestial dragons and their slaves. Garp and Roger teamed up to stop them, and the aftermath was so violent, the island basically rage quit the history books. On paper, that's already a mess. You've got the most infamous pirate crew in history targeting the literal top of the world's power system, and the response is, quick, get the future pirate king to co-op with the future marine hero so we can protect the space aristocrats. People like to say, well, they were just stopping Rocks because he was too dangerous, to which I say, sure, but why does that suddenly turn the celestial dragons into damsels in distress? The alliance itself is the red flag. Because here's an interesting thing. If God Valley was just some random island, why were the celestial dragons even there in the first place? The series quietly pushes the idea that this was a special venue, more like a private estate or hunting ground, the kind of place where nobles play most dangerous game with human beings. We literally see a version of this in Sabaody, with the slave auctions and the collars. Scale that up. Hide it from the world. Now, any child present on that island is automatically suspicious. Kids aren't background NPCs at that kind of party. So when you tell me Shanks was found as a baby in a treasure chest at God Valley. I want to emphasize how politically cursed that is. That's not a random orphan. That's a piece of evidence. One very popular idea is that he's a survivor of a purged bloodline or faction within the celestial dragons, Figarland, or something adjacent, someone whose existence would be extremely inconvenient to whichever side won God Valley. You don't stuff a baby into a chest unless somebody is hiding him from their own people. And to be fair, Oda has a very consistent visual language for "we are hiding a war crime." Ohara gets Buster called and erased from maps. Lulusia gets literally deleted from the sky. God Valley vanishes from official records. Every time an island disappears, it's because it was sitting on a forbidden truth the regime can't let spread. Now line that pattern up with the fact that Shanks is the only named child survivor we know from God Valley. That is not subtle. That is Oda putting a giant neon sign on this man that says, "Walking Redacted Document." Which brings us to the uncomfortable question, if Shanks is a living God Valley secret, why is the world government tolerating him at all? Is he so dangerous they actually can't touch him? Or is he part of the post-God Valley arrangement? Some kind of noble hostage, off-the-books asset, or guarantor of whatever deal Roger and the government cut that day? Because if the answer is the second one, then every time Shanks protects the balance, he might just be protecting the terms of that original crime scene. The Figarland theory. Is Shanks a celestial dragon? And that brings us to the part of the iceberg where the water gets really cold, the Figarland name. Because if Shanks is protecting the terms of the original crime scene, we kind of have to ask whose crime it was. And Film Red just quietly slides a surname across the table like, "Oh, by the way, this man might be One Piece royalty." In the movie, the world government materials explicitly refer to Utah as Uta of the Figarland Family, and treat that name like it has weight. The implication is pretty straightforward. Shanks is a Figarland, Uta is his adoptive daughter, and the government recognizes that lineage on paper. People will say, "Yeah, but movies aren't canon," to which I say, "Cool, tell that to Oda, who literally supervised Film Red, designed new characters, and let them drop a brand new noble family name in a franchise where he guards surnames like national secrets." Here's an interesting thing about Oda and movies. He uses them as a sandbox, not a trash can. Shiki and Strong World gets name-dropped in the manga. Concepts like Zephyr, the Neo-Marines, and even vague tech ideas echo back into the main story. Because as far as author intent goes, he almost never invents a fancy bloodline name just for merch. When you hear Don Quixote, Nefertari, Trafalgar, that's long-term lore infrastructure, not a throwaway gag. So the core Figarland theory goes like this. Shanks is part of a celestial dragon offshoot family, probably one of the lesser branches that were at God Valley when Rox attacked. Something happens. Rox rampage, Garp and Rogers counterattack. That mysterious incident the government wants erased, and the Figarlands either lose status or quietly go rogue. Baby Shanks ends up in a treasure chest. Roger finds him, and suddenly you have a noble kid raised on a pirate ship with a world government barcode still stamped on his DNA. And to be fair, Shanks does not move through the world like a random East Blue dock worker who lucked into a cool hat. Look at his manners. He's effortlessly polite, composed, never groveling, never overcompensating. His clothes, simple but tailored in that I grew up around people who own continents way. The way he walks into Whitebeard's ship, into Marineford, into Wano's political mess. Calm, confident, zero deference. That's not just hockey. That reads like someone who was taught from birth that rooms bend around him. This also cleans up a huge lore mess around his political power. Why does the Gorosei grant him a private audience in the Room of Sacred Fire? Why can he stroll into merry yoys with no chains, no escort, no admiral breathing down his neck? Why has no top marine ever been dispatched with the explicit mission kill Shanks, when they'll happily nuke Ohara, chase Luffy, and send Kizaru after Sabaody rookies? If Shanks is Figarland, the answer is simple. He's not just a Yonko, he's one of their own. I want to emphasize how much that would reframe the chill pirate dad act. If this theory is right, then the guy laughing in a barrel in East Blue is actually a runaway space noble choosing the sea over the Holy Land. Which raises the next, much uglier question. What kind of celestial dragon walks away from godhood to become a pirate? And what did he see at God Valley that made him do it? Bloodline politics. Why Shanks' heritage matters. And here's where the blood gets messy. Because if Shanks really is some kind of Figarland space aristocrat, that's not just fun trivia for the wiki goblins. That plugs him straight into One Piece's favorite obsession. You are simultaneously not your parents and also eternally paying for their nonsense. We've seen this pattern a lot. Ace dies for a war that started with Roger. Robin is hunted from age 8 because Ohara asked the wrong questions. Vivi is stuck cleaning up Cobra's political baggage. Shirahoshi inherits an ancient promise she didn't sign up for. The series is basically a generational debt collector. So, if Shanks is a celestial dragon by birth, he's the ultimate version of that idea, the child of the villains, choosing to become the symbol of freedom. Or at least, that's what it looks like on the surface, to which I say, are we sure that's all he's doing? Because as far as world-building goes, a noble-born pirate is a walking contradiction by design. The celestial dragons are literally the most hated people on the planet. Pirates are literally the freest. Shanks stands in the middle laughing, drinking, and casually walking into Marie-Joie like it's his dad's office. That's not just cool guy energy, that's a political role. His existence alone is a bridge between two groups that should never, ever be in the same room. And yet somehow he is, and nobody vaporizes him on sight. Here's an interesting thing. That bridge gives him both protection and leverage. If he's a God Valley survivor with a Figarland surname, the world government can't just execute him like any other Yonko without risking the ugliest kind of internal scandal. Hey, why did that pirate's blood test ping the Holy Land database? And if Shanks knows what actually happened at God Valley, he can quietly threaten to blow up 40 years of buried history any time they push too hard. It's mutually assured lore destruction. This is why he operates above normal pirate rules. He can negotiate directly with the Gorosei, influence marine decisions at Marineford, and still be recognized as a Yonko who terrifies other emperors. That's not just raw hockey power. That's a hybrid status no one else holds. Not dragon, not Blackbeard, not Big Mom with her underworld connections. Shanks is simultaneously part of the balance of the three great powers, and also the guy who can walk backstage and talk to the directors. So what if his real job is to keep that balance in a very specific shape? A configuration that keeps the Yonkos scary, the Marines necessary, the Revolutionary Army contained, and whatever remains of his original family's interests quietly safe. And to be fair, that's exactly the kind of vague, long-term system Oda loves, one guy whose personal choices prop up the entire era, which makes his decision to bet everything on Luffy a lot more suspicious. If Shanks is a product of elite bloodline politics, What is he actually trying to pass on? And to whom? Is Luffy inheriting the will of Roger, or the unfinished project of a runaway celestial dragon? We need to talk about that next. Shanks and the Gorosei, a pirate with a VIP pass. And right when you're thinking, okay, Shanks is just a very classy deadbeat celestial dragon, Oda immediately cuts to the wildest flex in the series. This man walks into Mary Joy's during the reverie like he's got a VIP wristband to the end of the world. I want to emphasize how insane that scene is in-universe. This isn't some back-alley deal with a corrupt CP0 agent. Shanks is in the room where history gets deleted, talking to the Gorosei about a certain pirate. No cuffs, no guards pointing guns at his head. Just 5 old men who can literally erase kingdoms, politely asking what this Yonko would like to discuss. Look at their body language. They're not tense. They're not sweating. They're not doing the usual pirates are trash speech. They straight up say they're making a special exception for him. That is not how the world government talks to sea emperors. That's how the world government talks to a stakeholder. Because, as far as the government is concerned, Yonko are supposed to be existential problems, not meeting attendees. Kaido and Big Mom get buster calls and secret weapons. Whitebeard gets panicked war preparations. Blackbeard gets, oh no, the worst-case scenario. Nobody looks at those people and goes, yeah, bring him up to the sacred chamber. We'll grab some tea. So why is Shanks different? Here's an interesting thing. You can kind of boil it down to 2 big reads. 1, Shanks is a tolerated, necessary evil. The balance of power system needs one relatively sane emperor who isn't trying to erase Sabaody or kidnap mermaids for fun. So the Gorosei let him operate as a pressure valve. He stops Kaido from crashing Marineford. He ends the war. He keeps the pirate ecosystem from becoming Pure Rocks 2.0. Or 2, Shanks doesn't just have political capital, he is political capital. If the Figarland/Celestial Dragon idea is right, then they're not accommodating a Yonko. They're negotiating with one of their own, who went off script but still holds leverage. You don't eliminate that, you manage it. And to be fair, that lines up uncomfortably well with how respectfully they phrase everything around him. Meta-wise, Oda choosing to show us this meeting before Aimu, before the Holy Knights, is not subtle. Our first peek into the highest level of world politics isn't a Marine, isn't a Cypher Pole commander. It's a pirate with a very specific haircut and a very vague agenda. It's Oda telling us that the pirate era and the government's inner circle are not separate systems, they're entangled, which leads to the uncomfortable question, if Shanks can walk into that room and nudge decisions at the top, how many natural events of the great pirate era were actually him quietly steering the wheel? And if he's been curating the chaos this whole time, what happens when he finally decides to stop? The Balance Keeper, Shanks, and the 3 great powers. So if Shanks has been quietly curating the chaos, we have to talk about the actual game board he's curating, the 3 great powers. Because as far as One Piece world-building goes, this is the closest thing the series has to a big red "Do Not Touch" sign. On paper, it's simple. You've got the Yonko ruling the new world, the Marines as the public face of the world government, and the Shichibukai as this weird discount Yonko program where the government goes, what if we legalize piracy, but like only a little? The idea is that these 3 forces check each other just enough that nobody can push the world into total war. It's a bad equilibrium, but it's an equilibrium. And I want to emphasize, Oda literally names them the 3 great powers. This is not subtle. Here's an interesting thing. Every time that balance is about to completely implode, a certain red-haired man just happens to be in exactly the right place. Marineford is the obvious one. Whitebeard dies. Blackbeard steals his fruit. Akainu is in full murder-children mode. The Marines are seconds away from annihilating the next Pirate King candidate on live TV. And Shanks walks in like the world's most overqualified substitute teacher. One sword block on Akainu, one speech, and suddenly Sengoku is like, "Yeah, okay, the war's over." People will say, "Well, that's just because he's strong," to which I say, "Sure, but why is he also the guy who intercepts Kaido before Marineford even starts? If Kaido crashes that party, you don't get a war, you get a franchise-ending extinction event. That's the Yonko side of the triangle going nuclear." Shanks quietly removes that piece from the board, then shows up at the end to tell everyone to put their toys away. And to be fair, this pattern doesn't stop there. Post-Wano, while the Marines are scrambling, the warlord system is abolished, and the Yonko lineup is literally being rewritten. Who's suddenly on the move again? Shanks. He's hovering at Wano's edge. He's choosing when to engage Kid. He's reacting not like a freewheeling adventurer, but like someone watching a very delicate Jenga tower. His timing is too perfect to be coincidence. He consistently appears when the balance is about to break in a way that would collapse the whole system, not just shake it. This is where Shanks starts to diverge from Luffy philosophically. Luffy wants freedom in the purest, dumbest, most beautiful sense. No cages, no thrones, just vibes and meat. Shanks feels like he wants controlled chaos. Enough piracy and dreaming to keep the age alive, but not enough to burn Marie Joieuse down before something is ready. And if he's a Figarland-style celestial dragon with Gorosei access, he is literally the ideal balance keeper. Noble credentials upstairs, Yonko power downstairs. Which sets up the real nightmare question. If Shanks is the balance keeper, what happens when Luffy's dream requires breaking that balance on purpose? And why would the guy maintaining the table still choose to bet everything on the kid who's destined to flip it? Hockey monster, the hidden depths of Shanks' power. Because if Shanks is the guy keeping the table steady, we also have to admit something kind of terrifying. This man can flip the entire board without even standing up. Politically scary is one thing. Politically scary and built like a hockey nuke is a very different problem. So, what have we actually seen on panel from the alleged chill mentor archetype? He walks onto Whitebeard's ship and casually clashes Conqueror's hockey with the man closest to Pirate King level, splitting the sky like it's a party trick. He strolls into Marineford late, blocks Akainu's magma fist one-handed with a basic-looking sword catch, and everyone just stops. Marines drop unconscious from his mere arrival, and the war ends because the red-haired guy said so. Then, after Wano, he flexes on Green Bull from offshore with pure Heiki Wi-Fi, terrifies an admiral, and snipes Aramaki's observation across an entire country. That's not a move set, that's a warning label, and to be fair, this is all with no devil fruit, no flashy mythical zone, nothing. One arm, rusty pirate sword, sandals. Yet every top tier treats him like a walking natural disaster. Akainu, who just tried to chase down a Yonko fleet, takes one look and cools off. Sengoku, the guy who fought Roger and Whitebeard, is like, yeah, if Shanks says stop, we stop. Because as far as the power system goes, that only makes sense if his hockey is on a completely different axis. Here's an interesting thing. Shanks is basically the poster child for hockey supremacy, the fantasy where hockey alone can keep up with any broken fruit. conqueror's haki? He doesn't just have it, he weaponizes it. Advanced COC coating on that Whitebeard clash, the Marineford entrance that feels like mass emotional crowd control, and now the observation-killing trick implied with his future sight sniping in the post-Wano chapters. He doesn't just see the future, he shuts your future off. People call it broken, to which I say, yes, that's the point. I want to emphasize how deliberate the drip feed is. We are over 1,000 chapters in, and Oda has refused to give us one full Shanks fight. No proper opening, no mid-fight struggle, no finishing sequence. Just surgical, hyper-efficient violence. One clash, one block, one stare, one admiral bullied through Wi-Fi hockey. It's the opposite of Luffy's messy, drawn-out brawls. Shanks is what happens when you optimize for threat per panel. And that loops us right back to his role as balance keeper. A man who can end a world-class war with a look doesn't need to fight often. He just needs to fight so convincingly that nobody wants to be the next example. The Marines get it, the Yonko get it, even the Gorosei clearly factor that power into their political calculations. But the real red flag isn't how strong he is. It's who he chooses to point that strength at, and who he very carefully never swings at, even when he absolutely could. Because once you track where the gun aims, and where it mysteriously holsters itself, Shanks' kind mentor routine starts to look a lot more like targeted, selective violence. Marineford, the day Shanks chose who lives and who dies, and nowhere is that selective violence louder than the quietest moment of Marineford. The second the sky splits, the music cuts, and everyone collectively goes, "Oh, Dad's home." Shanks doesn't just walk into the war, he patches in like an admin, logging onto a lagging server and immediately hits /shutdown. Recap the sequence. The war has already eaten Ace. Whitebeard is a corpse standing upright out of pure narrative spite. Blackbeard has done his little talent show. Akainu is mid-murder spree, about to delete Kobe for having basic human empathy, and suddenly a sword blocks the magma. One arm, no devil fruit, just raw hockey and social capital. Then Shanks casually offers to throw hands with any remaining problem, and every major faction, including Sengoku, just accepts him as the referee of reality. As far as war finales go, that's not an entrance, that's a patch note. But here's an interesting thing. If he can do that at the end, why not at the beginning? Why not show up when Ace is about to be executed, or when Whitebeard is still alive enough to negotiate? The easy answer is Oda needed drama. To which I say, yes, obviously. But inside the story, this timing is a mess. Shanks has the power, the Yonko title, the Roger clout, the ability to casually talk to the Gorosei off-screen. You're telling me the guy who can walk into the holy room of the world government can't get a meeting about, hey, maybe don't publicly kill Roger's son until after the body hits the floor. It starts to look like he lets the old era burn out on purpose. Whitebeard, last remnant of Rock's generation. Ace, the most legitimate inherited claim to Roger's will. The old Yonko balance where Whitebeard is the stable pillar. All of that gets fed into the fire, and walking out of Marineford we instead have Blackbeard as a chaos Yonko, Luffy as the traumatized but surviving future king, and Shanks still perfectly intact, still the respectable pirate statesman. The board resets around younger pieces, while the one old-era survivor is the guy curating the reset, and I want to emphasize who he actually bothers to save. Kobe, the crybaby Marine who dares to yell that the war is pointless, gets a personal intervention. Luffy, unconscious and defenseless, gets protected so hard that even Mihawk backs off. Ace? Nothing. This is the kid he knows is Roger's son, the brother Luffy would die for, the man whose execution is literally the trigger for the war. Shanks risks his crew for Kobe's future as a moral compass of the Marines, but he doesn't move a finger until Ace is already dead. Because as far as patterns go, Marineford makes Shanks look less like a heroic fireman and more like a gardener with a very sharp pair of shears. He prunes Whitebeard's dominance and Ace's claim from the tree of history, but walls off Luffy and Kobe as protected growths for the new era he keeps talking about. He lets Blackbeard live as a necessary devil. He ends the war exactly at the point where the maximum symbolic damage has been done and his preferred pieces are still on the board. Which raises the uncomfortable question we kind of don't want to ask. If Shanks is willing to let Ace die for that curated future, what happens when Luffy's dream finally collides with whatever Shanks is actually protecting? Does the gardener keep nurturing the sapling, or is he ready one day to cut it down too? The Yonko game, how Shanks manages monsters. So when we talk about Shanks as gardener of the era, we also kind of have to admit he's running the world's scariest petting zoo. Because as far as Yonko go, he's not just another apex predator. He's the guy quietly deciding which monster is allowed to bite who and when. Look at his greatest hits with other emperors. With Whitebeard, he doesn't roll up for a friendly sack reunion. He boards the Moby Dick, scars out. Conqueror's Haki literally cracking the sky just by existing, and begs this living earthquake machine to pull Ace off Blackbeard. Not to save Ace's life, but to stop a specific chain reaction. Ace dies, Whitebeard rages, Marineford happens, the board flips. Whitebeard ignores him, to which I say, that one went great. 10 out of 10, no notes. Then we have the Kaido situation, which Oda leaves as this wonderfully vague mess. On the eve of Marineford, Kaido decides, you know what sounds fun? Jumping the world government while they're distracted. And somehow, off-screen, Shanks intercepts him, they clash, and Kaido just doesn't show up. This is a creature who canonically tried to kill himself for fun. You don't talk that guy down with a sternly worded letter. Whatever happened, it was fast, decisive, and enough that Kaido went, not worth it. That's insane power, but it's also insane political control. Here's an interesting thing. Shanks almost never behaves like a normal Yonko. Kaido is building a permanent war festival. Big Mom is breeding a pan-racial wedding industrial complex. Blackbeard is out here looting devil fruits like a gotcha whale with no self-control. Shanks? He's not expanding territory, not gobbling islands, not hunting ancient weapons. He shows up rarely, hits once, and vanishes. His empire is basically his crew, a flag, and the threat that if you make the wrong move, the red-haired guy personally appears to cancel your whole career. I want to emphasize how weird that is inside this system. The Yonko were supposed to be the chaotic counterweight to the Marines and warlords, but Shanks is the only one whose main visible goal is stability. He stops Kaido from crashing Marineford. He tries to stop Whitebeard from triggering Marineford. He ends Marineford when everyone else is still foaming at the mouth. He's not trying to win the game. He's making sure nobody flips the board before the right final round. Which brings us to Blackbeard. Shanks knew he was dangerous decades ago, warned Whitebeard specifically about him, and yet hasn't hunted him down, even after Teach becomes Yonko. Why? It feels like Shanks is letting this necessary devil grow into the final boss the era needs. while constantly trimming the branches so he doesn't devour the world too early. Marineford clears out Whitebeard, creates a vacuum, Blackbeard rises, the endgame pieces assemble. Suspiciously convenient, and if Shanks is curating Kaido's rampages and Blackbeard's ascent like that, where does Luffy actually fit? Is he the king piece Shanks has been protecting from the start, or just the last risky move the red-haired manager has to make before he retires from babysitting gods and monsters? Luffy's hero, or his final obstacle? If Shanks is the red-haired manager of gods and monsters, then Luffy is the one-problem employee he personally radicalized. Because we have to talk about the fact that Shanks didn't just protect a kid in a fishing village. He literally manufactured the main character. Run back the highlight reel. Shanks laughing off Higuma. Shanks betting his arm on Luffy's life. That Sea King scene that lives rent-free in all our brains. And then the hat, the pause, the "this is my treasure, I'm lending it to you." That's not a casual gesture. That's the same straw hat that sat on Roger's head when he turned the entire world into a treasure hunt. Shanks doesn't just save Luffy, he plugs him into an existing myth and hits restart. And to be fair, the fandom kind of freezes him there. Early East Blue Shanks is like a comfort gif. We stop the tape at "Cool Uncle Who Believes in You" and ignore that decades pass. Luffy grows into a Yonko-level disruptor, the world government mutates into open fascist panic mode, and Shanks quietly becomes the guy who can walk into Maria Joie and book a meeting with the Gorosei like he's got a loyalty card. But in our heads, he's still Bar Shanks doing party tricks with a cup of sake. Here's an interesting thing. When Shanks puts that hat on Luffy, he's not just inspiring a dream, he's loading a gun. Roger's hat is already associated with the man who broke the old era. Passing it on is basically saying, "You are the next Joy Boy candidate. Please go collide with the entire power system." People say, "Oh, he just believed in the kid." To which I say, mate, believing in the kid while handing him a symbol that makes the Gorosei sweat is not neutral mentorship. Because as far as balance goes, Shanks is consistently the guy maintaining it. He stops Kaido from crashing Marineford, stops the war before it becomes a total extinction event, and even in Wano's aftermath he's like, "Yeah, actually, now I'll move for the One Piece." If his whole job is keeping the world from tipping over, and Luffy's dream is literally tear down the Yonko structure, punch the celestial dragons by accident, and free everyone, those vectors are going to cross. At some point, "I love that kid," and "I can't let the world burn" become mutually exclusive statements. So what if Shanks sees Luffy as both successor and stress test? If Luffy can surpass him, his haki, his will, his ability to carry that hat without recreating Rocks-level chaos, then maybe the world is actually ready to move past the current vague mess of a system. And if Luffy can't, then Shanks is the final firewall. I want to emphasize that makes all of Shanks' help look different. He's not just training Luffy to become Pirate King. He might be training him indirectly to kill his own mentor. And the really uncomfortable question is, does Shanks fully expect, and maybe even want, to lose that fight? The Gomu Gomu Heist. What Shanks really stole. And that brings us to the crime that kind of breaks the whole story open, the Gomu Gomu Heist. Because once you know what that fruit really is, Shanks, "Oops, my bad, the kid ate it," routine stops being cute and starts looking like premeditated destiny fraud. Recap time. We all grew up thinking Luffy had the most mid-fruit in the East Blue Costco aisle. Rubber boy, funny faces, good for slapstick. Then Wano drops the bomb that it's actually the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika. A mythical human fruit the world government has been trying and failing to lock down for centuries. They literally rename it, bury it in records, and treat its awakening like a world-ending event. This is not just another Loga, this is the jailbreak key for the whole system. And who just happens to steal that exact fruit from a world government ship? Shanks, not Kaido, not Big Mom, not some rando rocks remnant. The guy Oda keeps in the narrative freezer for 20 years suddenly shows up having robbed the one fruit Emu would actually lose sleep over. People like to say, well, maybe it was random, to which I say, in a story this tightly retrofitted, randomness is just foreshadowing we haven't decoded yet. Because as far as logistics go, that implies intel. You don't accidentally intercept a secret government transport carrying their most cursed artifact. Somebody told Shanks where and when to be. That could be an insider in the government. It could be something Roger learned at Laugh Tale, or it could be Shanks' own noble background quietly giving him access to celestial dragon gossip. Here's an interesting thing. The God Valley incident is literally about celestial dragons and dangerous powers being moved around like loot. Shanks is found in a treasure chest at that battle, and then 38 years later, he's stealing the one power that terrifies the same institution. That's not a coincidence. That's a closed loop. And to be fair, he doesn't just hoard it. He brings the fruit to Phosha Village. Not to his Yonko base, not to some fortress, but to a sleepy corner of East Blue where he just so happens to be emotionally investing in one specific kid. Are we really buying that letting Luffy eat it was pure accident? Or was it a controlled risk he was already willing to take the second this stubborn weirdo started talking about being freer than anyone while picking fights with mountain bandits? Tie that to God Valley, and it gets darker. If Shanks is a survivor of a previous purge of dangerous powers, he has first-hand proof that the government's instinct is always erase, never understand. So this time, he places Nika's power in the hands of someone truly feral, someone the celestial dragons would never predict or mold. I want to emphasize, he doesn't just give Luffy power, he gives that power a narrative alibi. He's just some rubber kid from East Blue. Which leaves us with the uncomfortable retention question. If Shanks knowingly handed the world's most forbidden fruit to a random kid at the end of the world map, what exactly is his endgame? And how much of Luffy's so-called free journey was quietly scripted from the start? Film Red and the Shadow of Uta. And that brings us to the part of the Shanks iceberg that sings J-pop and annihilates realities, Film Red. If the manga Shanks is a carefully redacted government file, Film Red is the emotional leak. We watch him literally raise Uta on the deck of the Red Force, doting dad mode unlocked, and then we jump cut to Elegia, a kingdom in ruins, a girl branded a demon, and Shanks calmly sailing away while the world decides he's a monster. People said, it's just a movie, it doesn't count. To which I say, buddy, Oda personally sat in the director's chair of this mess. Here's an interesting thing about canon-adjacent material. The plot specifics can wobble, but the character spine usually doesn't. Uta's exact status as real daughter, adopted daughter, or marketing daughter is flexible, but Oda locking in details like Shanks being found in a God Valley treasure chest and attaching the Figarland name in the Film Red orbit is not random. That's Oda quietly stapling emotional context onto lore we already know is important. Because, as far as Shanks's backstory goes, baby in a chest from the Rocks era plus potential celestial dragon lineage is not light flavoring. That's the whole stew. What matters for us is how Shanks behaves when the Elegia incident goes down. He realizes Uta's Sing Sing fruit is about to trigger a global catastrophe, understands that the world will need a villain, and then just volunteers. He lets the Marines and the public believe his crew slaughtered a kingdom, lets Uta sit alone with the belief that he abandoned her, and never once corrects the record. He's a Yonko. A single word from him could rewrite the story. He chooses silence. Film Red basically screams that Shanks is the kind of man who will accept being hated, feared, and completely misunderstood if that's the cost of containing a disaster. And to be fair, that tracks almost too well with the main story. Marineford? He arrives late, lets Ace die, lets Whitebeard die, and only steps in when the war's symbolic function is complete. Fuchsia Village? He lets a kid lose an arm and almost his life to a sea king, then plays it off with a smile. Uta? He lets her believe the worst about him until the very end, because the narrative of Demon Girl destroyed Elegia keeps the world stable. I want to emphasize, this is not pure cinnamon roll Dad Shanks. This is a soft-spoken utilitarian who will make brutal calls and then carry the emotional weight alone. He optimizes for the right future, not the least suffering in the moment, which raises the uncomfortable sequel to our earlier question. If this is how he treats his own daughter figure, what kind of impossible choice is he quietly preparing to make when the entire world's hopes are pinned on Luffy, the dark side of a red-haired savior? And that impossible choice language sounds noble, right up until you line up what Shanks has actually chosen to let happen. Because, as far as track records go, our red-haired savior has a body count by omission. Rapid fire. He inspires Luffy to become a pirate, and literally kick-starts the new age. He steals the Nika fruit from the world government, and then, accidentally, lets the chosen kid eat it. He watches Ace march toward a war, and does not physically drag him back. He only shows up at Marineford after Ace is already dead. He has the political power to walk into the Gorosei's room, but uses that access to talk about a certain pirate, not to declare war on the celestial dragons. He can end battles in a panel, but he selectively intervenes in exactly one, the one that preserves the existing balance of the Yonko and Marines. People say, he's just one man, he can't be everywhere, to which I say, cool. But he's also the one man Oda has shown casually paralyzing admirals with haki and getting VIP meetings in Mariajois. That combination of power and access makes his inaction louder than most people's actions. Here's an interesting thing. Shanks is present around basically every historic atrocity window, and he just doesn't move. Ohara? No red-haired ship on the horizon. The celestial dragons hunting people like animals at Sabaody? No legendary Yonko sailing in to knock Charlos into orbit? Blackbeard's rise? Shanks knows he's dangerous enough to scar him, knows he's a time bomb, and then kind of lets that bomb tick until Marineford, when it's already exploded. I want to emphasize, this doesn't make him secretly evil, twirling a mustache in a Figarland mansion. It makes him something weirder, a guy optimizing the timeline. His principle doesn't feel like freedom for all right now. It feels like controlled evolution. Let the world change, but not so fast that it collapses into total chaos. Let Luffy embody Joy Boy, but only after the seas, the Yonko system, and the world government are all positioned for a specific kind of break. And to be fair, that's a valid strategy if you're playing 5D chess with 800 years of trauma. But it also means Shanks is kind of gatekeeping liberation itself. He permits just enough chaos for a new era headline, not enough for an actual revolution that burns the celestial dragons out of the sky. He reins in Kaido. He ends Marineford. He stabilizes Wano's fallout by existing as a deterrent. He's a pressure valve, not a bomb. From Dragon's perspective, that's not a hero. That's a problem. Imagine dedicating your life to tearing down the world government, only to watch this beloved red-haired icon repeatedly step in at the exact moment things might tip too far. At some point, you have to ask, is Shanks protecting people or protecting the system from collapsing before he's ready? And when that final war finally hits, does a man like that stand shoulder to shoulder with Dragon, with the very celestial dragons he might be descended from, or walk a third path that serves only his own secret mission? Setting the stage, what this all means for the final saga. So at this point, our nice comforting image of Shanks as cool uncle who brings you a hat and trauma is kind of dead. We've stacked way too many weird specifics on him for this to just be a background legend who occasionally walks in to drop a quote and a soundtrack. We've got the God Valley baby in a treasure chest origin, which already ties him to the single most politically cursed island in the series. We've got the Figarland hints painting him as maybe not so purely human noble. We've got VIP access to the Gorosei's sacred office, where they speak to him like he's part of the system, not just some Yonko with good PR. On top of that, he's a hockey monster who can literally parry Whitebeard's conquerors and stop Akainu's magma fist with one arm and a glare. And wrapped around all that power is a guy who lets Ace die, preserves the Yonko balance, and quietly nudges Luffy's journey while never actually stepping in to save him. I want to emphasize, in the final saga, that bundle of contradictions is not allowed to stay in the background anymore. Elbaf is coming into focus. Shanks is already moving his crew toward the One Piece. Blackbeard is hunting the same prize, and the world government is panicking about an inherited will they barely understand. Oda once said, "When Shanks moves, the story moves," to which I say, cool, but now he's sprinting. If we misread him at this stage, we're misreading the shape of the ending. Because as far as the endgame is concerned, re-evaluating Shanks isn't optional homework. If he's secretly noble by blood, a political broker by profession, and the final emotional and ideological test for Luffy, then every assumption like he's just a good guy or he's secretly evil is too small. The real question is, whose future is this man actually fighting for? The Celestial Dragon's continued survival? Imu's frozen status quo? Some third, Joy Boy adjacent idea of a controlled new dawn, where he decides who's allowed to reach it? Here's an interesting thing. The rest of this video is basically us stress testing that question. Next, we're going to dig into how Shanks might connect to Imu and the Holy Knights, because that Gorosei meeting does not look like a one-off favor call. Then we'll walk through the looming Shanks versus Blackbeard clash, not as cool Yonko fight, but as a possible rematch of God Valley's core conflict. After that, we have to talk about the inevitability of Shanks versus Luffy, not as a friendly spar, but as the last gate standing between Luffy and Laugh Tale. And to be fair, maybe he's not guarding the treasure at all. Maybe he's guarding the meaning of it. What if the real thing Shanks is protecting at Laugh Tale's doorstep isn't gold, or even the Rio Poneglyph, but the power to decide how that truth gets used? Which brings us to the one object he's never treated casually, the one thing he passed to Luffy but never truly let go of, the straw hat. In the next section, we're going to ask a very stupid-sounding but actually terrifying question. What if the hat itself is the core of Shanks' grand design, the Shanks-Roger dynamic, protege, prisoner, or political asset. So if the hat is the core of Shanks' grand design, we kind of have to ask, what kind of cheerful cabin boy origin story ends with you being on a first-name basis with the world's final boss council? Because as far as the official narrative goes, Shanks is just Roger's smiley red mascot. And, to be fair, that's cute. Until you remember he was literally found as a baby in a treasure chest after a celestial dragon massacre. People like to shrug and say, Roger just took him in, to which I say, sure, and I just casually adopt random God Valley loot babies and keep them on my illegal superweapon for decades. The Pirate King is not running a daycare. If you rescue a baby from the most politically radioactive event of the age, you're not just being nice, you're taking possession of a living secret. So let's lay out the 3 big roles Shanks could have played on that ship. Option 1. Genuine adopted son and protege, the emotional core of the crew. Option 2. A living key to a political secret, the one person whose bloodline can blow up the world government's entire divine PR system. Option 3. A hostage-like safeguard, someone Roger keeps close, because if the government ever moves on him too hard, suddenly their own precious lineage is at risk. Here's an interesting thing. In every flashback, Shanks is right there next to Roger, on the prow when they're staring at the horizon, at parties, at the execution, always framed in that inner circle. But we actually know almost nothing about their private conversations. We see the vibes, not the briefings. Was Roger telling him dad jokes, or was he quietly explaining, "You are Figarland Shanks, and the day the world learns that name, everything breaks"? Now line that up with the timing of Roger's final voyage. He rushes to Laughtail, disbands the crew, and walks to his death grinning. On the surface, it's romantic pirate nonsense. Underneath, it kind of looks like a man trying to remove pieces from the board before the God Valley truth resurfaces. If Shanks is a political nuke, the safest move might be to scatter the launch codes. And then we hit the scene that everyone remembers, but almost nobody interrogates. Shanks coming back from Laughtail, crying, refusing to tell Buggy what he learned. We usually file that under Void Century is sad, but what if that breakdown is also, "Oh, I'm not just some kid Roger picked up, I am the collateral of a genocide"? I want to emphasize how personal that would make the so-called Great War. Tie in the Figarland angle and the picture gets worse. If Shanks is celestial dragon blood, he's a walking contradiction, the divine cast producing the man who inspires the next Joy Boy. That is a narrative bug in the world government's God mode system. Roger, who literally hears the voice of all things, might see Shanks as the key piece that proves the gods are just people. So when Shanks becomes a Yonko, plays balance keeper, has a polite Gorosei meeting in their sacred chamber, is he continuing a mission Roger handed him, guide the next era, trigger the war, or is every move actually him trying to smother that prophecy before it ignites? Did Roger ask him to light the match, or spend his life holding it away from the powder keg? Because the next question we have to ask is, if Shanks himself is that dangerous, what does it mean that he put the hat, the symbol of Roger's will, on Luffy's head and walked away? Why didn't Shanks go after the One Piece? The deliberate stall. So why does the guy who literally sailed with the Pirate King, heard the Laughtail punchline, has top 3 hockey in the verse, and sits on a Yonko throne, act like the One Piece is a side quest he keeps forgetting to pin on his map? That's not chill, that's suspicious, because as far as excuses go, the fandom has a whole menu. Shanks is just a free spirit. He doesn't care about titles. He just wants peace and vibes. To which I say, this is the same man who single-handedly walked into Whitebeard's ship, clashed Conqueror's hockey so hard the sky cracked, and then later strolled into Marineford and told Sengoku, "War's over," like he was closing a bar at 2 a.m. That's not free spirit energy. That's project manager of the apocalypse. Here's an interesting thing. Every time Shanks actually moves, it's about maintaining a very specific balance. He keeps the three great powers stable by not overexpanding his territory. He intercepts Kado before Marineford, blocking a monster from crashing the war. He's tied to the Gomu Gomu/Nika fruit getting out of government hands, but also to Ace's death indirectly by encouraging him to pull back from Blackbeard, which Ace ignores. His career looks less like a pirate's rise and more like a decades-long effort to slow the story's doomsday clock. Whitebeard spells this out with that throne conversation. He mocks the idea of someone taking the throne. And Shanks doesn't argue, doesn't say, "I'll be Pirate King." He just looks like a guy checking the locks on the door. I want to emphasize that image. Not a contender for the crown, but a guard dog for the empty chair itself. The title isn't the problem. The timing of who sits there is. Look at Marineford. If Shanks really cared about saving Ace, why not appear at the start, flex that Gorosei-level political power, and negotiate? Instead, he waits until Whitebeard is dead. Ace is dead. The world has seen the horror of an all-out war. And then he slams the brakes. He's literally stopping the timeline from jumping straight into the final war route. It's like he lets the meter hit red, then yanks the cable before the machine explodes. And then, only after Luffy, Blackbeard, and the New Era Emperors are in place, only after the system is too volatile to freeze anymore, he suddenly says, "Okay, now I'm going for the One Piece." That is so obviously late it loops back around to being early. He's not entering a treasure hunt. He's entering endgame management. Who reaches Laugh Tale in what order, with what allies, is what he's trying to control. So if he's not chasing the crown, what catastrophe is he stalling by keeping that throne empty for 20 years? What happens if the wrong person opens Joy Boy's prize at the wrong moment, and Shanks isn't there to slow it down? Marineford revisited. Shanks didn't save the day. He saved the system. So let's jump to the scene everybody treats like Shanks' sainthood ceremony. Marineford. Sky splits. Magma Fist gets casually blocked. The soundtrack might as well start paying him rent. He walks in late to the apocalypse and just goes, "If you're still itching for a fight, we'll be your opponents." And the entire war suddenly remembers it has work in the morning. But here's an interesting thing. Who actually benefited from the war ending right there? Did the dead benefit? Did Whitebeard's crew benefit? The only people who walk away in a stronger position are the same old pillars of the three great power system. The Marines get to say, "We executed Ace and killed Whitebeard, mission accomplished," without having to expose how close they are to total collapse. The warlords keep their vague, messy middle ground. The Yonko lose one emperor, but not the structure itself. The board is bloody, but it's still the same board. If that war keeps going, what happens? Sengoku is exhausted. Garp is emotionally broken. The pacifistas are burning through battery life. And Blackbeard is literally just getting started. The longer that drags on, the more the Marines look weak on the world stage, and the closer we get to an actual revolutionary moment instead of a flashy execution event. Shanks doesn't just save lives, he saves the power system from imploding on camera. Listen to his language. He frames it as a war that has gone on long enough, to which I say, for whom? Because, as far as the pirates on the ground are concerned, Blackbeard is ready for round 2. Luffy's allies are still scrambling, and the New World is about to explode no matter what. Long enough is not a moral statement. It's a risk assessment. And then we get the Blackbeard interaction, which is wild if you slow it down. Shanks has arguably his best shot ever to remove Teach. Blackbeard's crew is fresh, but untested. The Marines are still present, and Shanks has just flexed on Akainu. Instead, he lets Teach walk. They exchange a few lines about it, not being time yet, and that's it. This is not a man cleaning the board. This is a man managing it, preserving a future threat he already tried to warn Whitebeard about. I want to emphasize how casually he negotiates with Sengoku. He doesn't beg. He states terms. Sengoku, the fleet admiral, just agrees. No celestial dragon tantrum, no Gorosei denial, just, I'll take responsibility. That only works if Shanks' political capital with the world government is already sky-high by this point. A regular Yonko doesn't get that. A God Valley treasure chest baby with secret lineage probably does. And to be fair, Shanks did try to prevent this exact tragedy. He boarded Whitebeard's ship, scar-throbbing, saying, "Don't let Ace chase Blackbeard." He predicts the chain of events. Ace dies, Whitebeard falls, Teach rises, but he doesn't stop it. He only slams the brakes when that spiral threatens to turn into the Great War Roger talked about, when the whole structure might tip too early. So why is Ace allowed to die while Kobe gets a last-second save from Akainu's fist? Why protect the kid who dares to question justice, but let the symbol of the old era burn? That's the moral knot we have to pull on next. The idea that Shanks isn't choosing good over evil. He's choosing which sacrifices keep his carefully delayed endgame intact. Ace, Kobe, and selective mercy, the moral math of Red-Haired Shanks. So let's sit with that for a second. Shanks shows up just a little too late to stop Ace's execution, but somehow exactly on time to catch Akainu's fist an inch from Kobe's face. That's not just dramatic timing. That's the kind of timing that makes you ask, okay, who gave this man the script? Because as far as Marineford goes, we've already seen Shanks try the boring, sensible option. He literally sails to Whitebeard beforehand and says, "Please don't let your hot-headed son chase Blackbeard. This is a bad idea." And he's not doing that because he's worried about one rookie. He's trying to unplug the war before it ever boots up. If Ace never hunts Teach, Teach never trades him for a warlord seat. And this whole paramount mess never reaches the point where the world government can publicly execute the Pirate King's son on pay-per-view. Ace ignores him. Events snowball. And here's an interesting thing. Once that snowball is rolling, Shanks does not hurl himself in front of it. He does not crash Marineford on day one to body-block the execution platform. He lets the war burn long enough to destroy Whitebeard, crack Marineford, and make the warlord system look like the clown show it always was. Ace dies. Whitebeard dies. The old era dies on camera. Is that cruelty? Or is that Shanks deciding that this is the necessary mythic sacrifice the world needs to move on? People say, well, he just couldn't get there in time, to which I say, mate, this is the same guy who later casually walks into a sacred chamber to chat with the Gorosei. The series keeps framing him as someone who can be exactly where he needs to be when it matters. So the more uncomfortable read is that Marineford was allowed to reach a specific breakpoint, and then, only then, does Shanks hit the brakes. And who does he actually save on screen? Not Ace, not Whitebeard, Kobe. The pink-haired crybaby from Chapter 1 who suddenly decides to scream at a Kainu in the middle of a battlefield and demand that the slaughter stop. That's the kid Shanks protects with a direct Conqueror's flex against a magma fist. Why? Because Kobe isn't just a good Marine. He's the prototype for what Marine justice could be after the war, a kind of moral core the institution doesn't currently have. Shanks even says Kobe's courage bought a few seconds that will change the future of the world, which is a wild line. That's not how normal people talk in the middle of a war. That's how someone talks when they're evaluating key events against a long-term scenario. I want to emphasize how meta that sounds, like he's grading Kobe's speech as a required flag in some giant invisible plan. So Shanks's mercy starts to look less like random kindness and more like targeted investment. He shields Luffy. He saves Kobe. He respects certain Marines. He lets others die. He's protecting specific pieces on both sides of the board because he probably believes those are the ones that can coexist in the world after the final conflict. And that leads to the really nasty question. If Shanks is willing to curate history with acceptable casualties, how different is his logic from the world government he supposedly opposes? Especially when we know he can walk into a room with the Gorosei and talk about a certain pirate, like a co-worker scheduling a meeting. That's where we have to go next. The pirate who stops wars on Sunday and has a board meeting with the secret rulers of the world on Monday. The holy audience, Shanks in marriage ways, and the politics of exception. So let's actually sit with how deranged that image is, a Yonko, one of the 4 great monsters of the sea, just casually walking into the Holy Land during the reverie, like he's got a 2 p.m. performance review with God. No cuffs, no buster call, no panicked Marine screaming, "It's red-haired!" Just an escort of government agents politely guiding him through the most restricted space on the planet. Because as far as the in-universe logic goes, this should not be possible. Mary Juas is where they literally drag slaves by the neck for looking at nobles wrong, and somehow the guy who knocked out half of Marineford with his presence is allowed to stroll into the room of authority. If Kaido showed up like this, we'd have a global extinction event. If Big Mom tried it, the Holy Land would be frosting by noon. Here's an interesting thing. The Gorosei aren't even shocked. They don't go, "How dare a pirate stand here?" They go, "We allowed you to come here to talk about a certain pirate." That line is insane. It implies process. It implies this was a request that went through channels, got stamped, and someone scheduled the room. And to be fair, that means this is probably not the first time. There's a rhythm to it like, ah yes, Shanks wants another off-the-books meeting. I want to emphasize how loaded "we allowed you" is. Pirates are, by definition in this world, enemies of humanity. You don't allow them into the Vatican plus Pentagon unless they occupy some legally weird category. What we're seeing is the politics of exception. Shanks, as a person who exists outside the normal law, not because he's beyond it, but because the highest law has carved out a Shanks-shaped hole. So you get this idea of Shanks as a state-sanctioned pirate, or at least an unofficial mediator, a Cold War back channel in a cape. He can move between factions that are supposed to be at war, Marines, Yonko, warlords, without triggering open conflict, because everyone's quietly agreed that when Shanks shows up, we treat it as diplomacy, not aggression. Who else in the series gets that treatment? Now plug in the Figarland theory. If Shanks is celestial dragon blood from God Valley, He's a rogue noble the Gorosei can't publicly acknowledge, but really don't want to waste. He's politically dangerous, knows too much, symbol of a buried incident, but also extremely useful as a deniable asset. If he does something convenient, they shrug. If he does something awkward, they say, "That pirate went too far," and cut him loose. And that certain pirate he mentions, whether it's Blackbeard, Luffy, or someone tied to the God Valley secret, that conversation happens right before the Reverie decisions to abolish the warlords and accelerate this new era. You're telling me the guy who ends Marineford, then walks into Mary Joie's, didn't help nudge the chessboard? So we end up with Shanks as the man who walks in both worlds, Holy Land and pirate seas, without being erased like every other inconvenient noble. What kind of power lets you do that? The answer might not be his sword at all, but the terrifying weight of his haki and what it quietly represents. Haki over everything. Shanks as the blueprint of spiritual supremacy. So when we say it might not be his sword at all, but we're kind of underselling it. Shanks is basically Oda standing on a chair yelling, "Haki is the real endgame. Stop asking me about new devil fruits." No fruit, one arm, allegedly missing half his hit points, and he's still framed as one of the most dangerous men alive. What is that, if not the author grabbing your face and going, "Look at the system"? Because as far as top tiers go, Shanks is built as a deliberate contradiction. Everyone else stacks toys. Whitebeard's fruit, Kaido's dragon, Big Mom's soul zoo, Blackbeard's double fruit mess. Shanks walks in with a sword he barely swings, and a vibe so oppressive the camera itself gets nervous. His whole design is Oda betting everything on the idea that willpower alone can sit at the same table as the most broken abilities in the series. Here's an interesting thing. In a story drowning in visual noise, Shanks's power is mostly invisible. His Conqueror's haki doesn't just knock out Whitebeard's crew on arrival, it literally cracks the wood of the Moby Dick. He clashes with Whitebeard, and the sky splits. He blocks Akainu's magma punch that was bodying Whitebeard like it's a mildly annoying hot potato. Then, in recent chapters, we get the Green Bull snipe. Dude is in a flower field miles away, and Shanks just broadcasts pure don't energy into his brain. That isn't strong haki. That's Wi-Fi rage quit. People say haki is a vague power, to which I say, yes, that's the point here. Shanks is the walking argument that the spiritual side of the system is intentionally underexplained, because if Oda fully quantified it, Shanks would break the power scaling chart in half. And to be fair, Oda ties this to character, not just numbers. Shanks losing his arm to save Luffy is usually read as, "Wow, what a sacrifice." But thematically, it's nastier. He literally gives up raw physical power so that a kid with the right will can inherit the future. The series keeps telling us inherited will beats brute strength. Shanks acts that out in Chapter 1. He's saying, "My era is finite, my haki is terrifying, but I'm cashing in part of it to buy stock in the next generation." That makes his political role make way more sense. Someone whose spirit can overrule an admiral's attack, an emperor's pride, or an entire battlefield's killing intent is the perfect ceasefire button. He ends Marineford by walking in and basically haki moderating the comments section of the world. You don't negotiate with Shanks because of his crew's numbers. You negotiate because your own will starts to feel very small around him. Film Red doubles down on this. The Marines and Gorosei aren't panicking about the red-hair pirates as a navy. They're terrified of what happens if Shanks himself gets serious. His hockey is treated like a narrative hazard sign. He uses it sparingly, not because he can't, but because if he cut loose, the story would be over in 3 panels, which raises the uncomfortable question we have to end on. Is that terrifying hockey purely earned, or is it also baked into his blood? The God Valley chest, the Figarland whispers, the way even the Gorosei treat him like a special case, all of that hints that Shanks's spiritual supremacy might not just be training, but something older and more dangerous. If his will can shake the world, what kind of lineage built that will in the first place? 1 arm, no fruit, no problem. The combat paradox of Red-Haired Shanks. And now we hit the big meme wall. How is the one-armed, fruitless ginger with a souvenir straw hat allegedly sitting at the same table as Kaido, Big Mom, and Blackbeard? People say, he's nerfed, he can't be that crazy, to which I say, you are vastly overestimating Oda's desire to keep this world balanced and underestimating how much he loves narrative camouflage. Because as far as Oda's bag of tricks goes, self-imposed handicaps are one of his favorite ways to hide broken characters in plain sight. Zoro loses an eye, and suddenly we all spend 10 years asking if it's sealed hockey mode. Garp is an old man who doesn't fight seriously anymore. Rayleigh is retired and rusty. Sengoku steps down right before the plot needs him. These people are talking excuses for why they don't just solo the story. The power is still there. The system just labels it off limits for now. Here's an interesting thing. Shanks' missing arm fits that exact pattern a little too well. The series keeps telling us, oh, he's handicapped, while showing us scenes like Marineford, where he clashes evenly with Whitebeard's Conqueror's hockey, or recent chapters where he literally erases Kid's crew from the story in one clean sequence. That's not a nerf. That's a governor switch. The arm isn't what's keeping Shanks from ending arcs, the outline is, and to be fair, that actually makes his backstory scarier. Imagine 2-armed Shanks on Roger's crew, sparring with Rayleigh, learning under the Pirate King, already having that insane spiritual pressure we've seen. We're looking at a guy who was probably Yonko tier before the word Yonko existed. The Shanks we know now feels like a sealed version, a deliberately downgraded build that still sits in the absolute top bracket of fighters, which raises a fun question. What did Roger see in that kid that made him comfortable retiring the Pirate King era? Then we add the no devil fruit thing. On paper, that's another limitation. In practice, it's Oda screaming, "Hockey is king," with a megaphone. Shanks stays fully mobile on the sea. He can walk into God Valley tier incidents without worrying about drowning. And symbolically, he's aligned with this pure, unbound freedom. All his power is will, spirit, presence. I want to emphasize how on-brand that is for a guy who talks about betting on the new age and then casually tells the Gorosei what he's worried about. Because his apparent disadvantages also do one more sneaky job. They make him likable. 1 arm, no fruit, goofy party dad energy with Luffy and Yuta. You drop your guard around him. It softens the darker implications of a man who can walk into Marineford, stop a Kainu mid-swing, and rearrange global politics with a conversation. And when we finally see him go all out in the final war, that missing arm is going to stop reading like a handicap and start feeling like a mercy Oda granted the rest of the cast, especially once we talk about the monsters he keeps around him, because his crew is its own layer of camouflage that quietly raises his true ceiling even higher. The red-haired pirates, a Yonko crew built for deterrence, not conquest. Because once you start looking past Shanks himself, his whole crew starts reading less like pirates and more like a mobile nuclear disarmament committee with a drinking problem. Compare them to the other Yonko. Whitebeard rolls up with a floating retirement home plus 16 division commanders and an allied fleet. Big Mom has a literal family empire, tax system, and sole homunculus HR department. Kaido is speed-running colonialism, dropping Zoan gotcha pulls on every island. Blackbeard is just chaos DLC, stapling powers to himself and hoovering up territory. The red-haired pirates? No empire, no permanent occupation, no giant armada. They show up, flex, and leave. And here's an interesting thing. Oda keeps framing them as small, tight-knit, and weirdly balanced. When Shanks docks at Marineford or Wano, we don't get endless fodder goons with unique hats. We get a handful of named monsters who feel like an elite strike team. It's less Pirate Nation and more if the Avengers were unionized bar regulars. That's not an accident. That's a design choice. Ben Beckman is the clearest example. The man points a gun at Kizaru, and an admiral who was just light-speed breakdancing through a war suddenly decides, you know what? I'm good. People like to say that was just a gag, to which I say, Oda does not waste panel time at the emotional peak of Marineford on a joke that undercuts an admiral for no reason. That's narrative shorthand for, this guy is Admiral Tier, do not touch. Lucky Roo? First chapter, he casually teleports behind a bandit and deletes him point blank. Yasopp is hyped as a sniper who never misses, the guy Usopp is desperately trying to measure up to. Every core member is framed as top tier in their niche. Brains, speed, range, brawling, support. It's a party comp, not a pirate mob. And to be fair, that exact composition is perfect if your real job isn't conquering islands, but stopping everyone else from going too far. Small, insanely strong, and mobile means rapid response. You can appear at Marineford at the last second, at Wano's border at the last second, at Elbaf's shore at the last second. You can do surgical interventions, pull off hostage rescues, or just stand there and negotiate, because as far as raw deterrent power goes, the implication is, fight us, and this escalates into a global incident. I want to emphasize how rarely we see them doing normal pirate stuff. No pillaging montage, no we crushed this kingdom flashback, no wanton cruelty. Their cameos are always attached to preventing disasters or nudging key characters. Saving Luffy, stopping the war, warning the Gorosei adjacent types in Film Red, scaring Kid off Elbaf before he accidentally speedruns his own funeral any harder. At that point, Shanks stops looking like just a Yonko and starts looking like a balance guardian. His crew is a walking, "Are you sure about this?" button for the rest of the endgame pieces. Their presence near a conflict is enough to make admirals, warlords, and other Yonko hesitate, which gets a lot more suspicious once you notice how often this so-called deterrent force is conveniently parked next to very specific devil fruits and very specific next-generation pirates. Luffy, Kid, the Gomu, no, it's actually Nika fruit. This man's crew keeps showing up right where the future is about to spawn, and that pattern is way too clean for just coincidence. The Gomu Gomu heist, Shanks, and the devil fruit that shouldn't exist. So let's rewind to what used to be one of the simplest, most wholesome flashbacks in shonen history before Oda turned it into a theological crime scene. Shanks' crew raids a world government ship, nabs the Gomu Gomu no Mi, brings it back to Fuchsia like it's weird contraband candy. Luffy eats it by accident. Everyone screams, then laughs, and we all move on. Fun gag, stretch boy, done. And then Wano drops the patch notes, and tells us, actually, that wasn't the Gomu Gomu no Mi. That was the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, a mythic human fruit the government has been desperately hiding for centuries. So now we have to ask the extremely obvious question the story keeps politely skating around. How did Shanks, of all people, just happen to jack the single most ideologically dangerous fruit in the world off a government transport like it was a random loot box? Because as far as we know, this thing is the anti-Imu fruit. It's tied to Joy Boy, to the sun god, to slave liberation, to the exact kind of hope the celestial dragons spend their entire budget trying to crush. You don't just toss that in a standard-issue briefcase with 2 mooks and a Den Den Mushi. This should be CP9, CP0, Seraphim Babysitter. If you lose this, you get erased from history. Levels of security. So when a Yonko-caliber crew intercepts it, we're not looking at goofy coincidence. We're looking at either insane luck or very specific intel. And to be fair, Shanks is the last guy we should assume is just insanely lucky. Here's an interesting thing. This is a man who was literally found as a baby in a God Valley treasure chest during the Rocks incident and then raised on Roger's ship. The same Roger who learned the Void Century truth and laughed. You're telling me nobody on that boat ever mentioned the sun god fruit that makes the world government panic? I want to emphasize how targeted this feels. Either Shanks knows from Roger's voyage exactly what Nika is, or he has access to information only someone with weirdly high-born connections gets. Figarland theory, Gorosei private meetings, the whole "why does this pirate get into Mariéjoie without being laser-deleted" mess, the fruit's route, its timing, Shanks' interception, it all reads like an operation, not a prank. Now, what was the plan? The most charitable read is that Shanks was trying to keep the fruit off the board altogether, lock it down on his ship, let the world government's favorite nightmare quietly disappear. Then Luffy, a kid he kind of likes, literally eats the apocalypse in front of him. And that's the pivot point. The arm, the smile, the hat. People read that as pure sentiment, to which I say yes, and also a strategic bet. In that moment, Shanks isn't just inspired by Luffy, he's choosing to back this accidental Nika candidate with his own legacy. If he knew the fruit's true nature, then that hat isn't just a promise of adventure, it's collateral in a world-scale gamble. Which raises the real question going forward. Did Shanks give that bet his blessing because he believes in Nika's freedom, or because he wants the god of liberation close enough to quietly control? Shanks and Luffy. Mentor, manipulator, or both? Shanks and Luffy's relationship is framed like the world's coziest childhood flashback. Campfire Storytelling 101. Goofy red-haired pirate, tiny rubber kid, bar full of laughter, and the ultimate coming-of-age moment where dad friend sacrifices his arm and says, "No worries, it's just an arm." We all swallowed that whole, but if we stop crying for 2 seconds and actually look at it, why is a God Valley-adjacent monster investing this hard in one random kid from East Blue? Because as far as we know, Luffy is nobody at that point. No bloodline reveal, no D, no Nika, just a mayor's grandson who accidentally ate the gum-gum fruit. And here's an interesting thing. Shanks doesn't treat him like a tavern mascot. He runs a full psychological boot camp in the most casual way possible. Laughing off Higuma's insults, that's lesson 1. Don't let petty power scare you. Sacrificing his arm. Lesson 2. Real strength is protecting the weak, entrusting the straw hat and saying, "Come find me when you're a great pirate." That's not just a promise, that's a mission statement tattooed on a child's brain. People say, he just liked the kid, to which I say, sure, and I just casually hand my life symbol to the first 8-year-old who yells at a sea king. Shanks makes Luffy promise to surpass him. That's a wild thing for a Yonko in progress to tell a village kid, unless he's already clocked, that this rubber gremlin is going to matter on a world scale. I want to emphasize how deliberate that feels. Every interaction is a value imprint. Freedom, protect your friends, punch up at tyrants. Now add the Nika angle. If Shanks knew the fruit's real name when he stole it from that government ship, he knew it was the Joy Boy piece in this whole cosmic Jenga set. Once Luffy eats it, you can read his behavior as, okay, the god of liberation is respawning here, so let's make sure he grows up with the right freedom ideology. Joy Boy, but calibrated. Not Rocks-level chaos, not Imu-level control, but Shanks' preferred middle path. And then he leaves. He never goes back to Dawn Island, never sends a messenger pigeon saying, "Hey, champ." He just lurks at the edges, watching Luffy's bounty, showing up at Marineford to stop Akainu from deleting the investment, reacting to Eni's lobby's flag burning like, "Yep, that's my boy." It's hands-off parenting with a pre-installed operating system. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Shanks can be genuinely fond of Luffy, and also kind of grooming him as a controllable Joy Boy. Someone whose honor, loyalty, and attachment to that hat keep him steerable when the storm hits. The world government controls history with censorship, erasing Ohara, sanitizing God Valley, weaponizing bounties. Shanks does the opposite. He controls the future through personal bonds and inherited will. One side redacts, the other side curates. So when they finally meet again, is that going to be a tearful bar reunion or a negotiation between two ideological superweapons who both think they know what true freedom looks like? Film Red as canon adjacent. Confession, what Uta reveals about Shanks. So if the Gorosei are curating history with a black marker, Film Red is Oda grabbing a red highlighter and going, "By the way, this guy, you're not ready." Yes, Film Red is technically non-canon, to which I say, cool, and Impel Down is technically just a building. The label matters way less than what Oda chose to put in there. Because as far as intent goes, Film Red is a confession tape. Oda is all over this movie, from the character designs to the core idea of Uta, and it drops right in the middle of the final saga ramp-up. That doesn't feel like random merch. That feels like Oda stress-testing how we react to a darker Shanks without actually breaking the manga continuity. Here's an interesting thing. The entire Elegia incident is basically a Shanks morality play. The public story is simple and brutal. Red-haired Shanks raids a music kingdom, destroys Elegia, abandons the adorable diva child he brought with him, and sails off to party. Monster. End of story. And to be fair, if that's all you knew, you'd put him in the same bucket as your average Rocks pirate. But the reality is the exact opposite. Shanks knows Uta's Sing Sing fruit is an apocalyptic cheat code. He watches this kid he loves become a walking mass hypnosis weapon and decides, okay, we're going to eat the villain edit. He lets the world believe he massacred a nation so that Uta takes the blame in a controlled way. The world government doesn't dissect her in a lab, and the true scale of her power stays off the books. That is the Shanks pattern in a nutshell. He is willing to be misunderstood, even hated, if that misunderstanding keeps a very fragile balance intact. He does it at Elegia. He does it at Marineford, walking in like the final boss, ending the war on his terms, and never explaining the full agenda to anyone. How many people in-world think he saved the day, and how many quietly think he stole their revenge. I want to emphasize how much the Uta situation mirrors his choices with Luffy. Twice now, Shanks looks at a child with terrifying potential and decides, "You don't get to grow up with me." He leaves Uta behind for her own good, then sails away from East Blue after betting his arm and his hat on Luffy. In both cases, he steps off stage so the kid can grow in peace while he handles the ugly backstage work with the Yonko system, the Gorosei, and whatever God Valley baggage he's still carrying. The red-haired pirates in Film Red sell this even harder. Publicly, they're the same carefree drunks. Privately, they're doting, hyper-competent, and extremely secretive guardians, running interference around Utah's concert, managing information, making morally gray calls with a smile. It's a crew built to look harmless while doing quiet damage control. And Uta's pain is the bill for all of that. She becomes the narrative test case. What does it look like when someone suffers because Shanks chose the big picture over personal bonds? It looks like a girl rewriting reality just to force the world to listen. Film Red is Oda warming us up. If we can accept fake Elegia villain Shanks, can we handle canon Shanks doing something that looks genuinely unforgivable for what he believes is the greater good? The Yonko system, Shanks as the quiet architect of controlled chaos. So when we say Shanks might do something unforgivable for the greater good, that only really lands if we admit the obvious, cursed truth. This man is basically HR manager for the Yonko system. He's not just stopping wars, he's doing performance reviews on apocalyptic pirates. Because as far as the story is concerned, the Yonko aren't just 4 cool endgame bosses. They're an unofficial but very functional distribution of terror system. 4 emperors carve up the new world. The marines and warlords push back just enough, and what you get is a tense, awful, but weirdly stable equilibrium. It's like the world's worst HOA. Everyone's armed, everyone's mad, but nobody wants to be the one to actually press the big red button. Here's an interesting thing. Every time that balance wobbles, Shanks appears like the universe's passive-aggressive IT guy. Blackbeard kills Thatch and goes rogue. Shanks sails to Whitebeard, scars on his face, and begs him not to let Ace escalate. Kaido wants to crash Marineford and turn bad into, "We have no setting left." Shanks intercepts him off-screen, which is Oda speak for, "You don't want to know how ugly that got." Kid starts building momentum, threatening another chaotic variable in the new world. Shanks personally pulls up and deletes his save file. People say, he's just stopping pointless bloodshed, to which I say, sure, but look at the pattern. He's not stopping all bloodshed. He's stopping specific chain reactions that could collapse the whole system. It starts to feel less like a hero move and more like a guy guarding the Jenga tower, slapping your hand away every time you reach for the wrong block. I want to emphasize, this doesn't make Shanks secretly a pacifist. It makes him a believer in managed violence. The Yonko era is a necessary evil to him, a way to keep any one banner, Roger 2.0, Joy Boy, Blackbeard, from uniting the seas before the world is ready, whatever that means in his head. So he takes the least expansionist role possible. No massive territory sprawl, no endless fleets, just a terrifyingly strong, relatively small crew that functions as an anchor. Everyone else is trying to tip the scale. Shanks is the weight keeping it from flipping over. And then we get the Gorosei meeting. A Yonko in the Holy Room, treated with wary respect. Both sides obviously hate each other's ideals, but they share one core goal: Do not let a single pirate snowball into a global reset button. Shanks is the one pirate they can talk to about that without immediately drawing swords. Post Wano, the board reshuffles. Luffy, Buggy, Blackbeard, Shanks. A Chaos Gremlin, a Meme Emperor, a final boss candidate, and the same red-haired stabilizer still in his chair. If the system didn't need an anchor anymore, why is he still there? And to be fair, look at his recent moves. Racing for One Piece, calling out Bartolomeo, flexing harder than ever. That doesn't feel like pure preservation. That feels like a man deciding the old equilibrium has outlived its usefulness, and if someone's going to blow up the Yonko system, it might as well be the guy who's been quietly holding the detonator the whole time. The scary part? When Shanks finally stops guarding the Jenga tower, he's not going to walk away. He's going to start pulling blocks himself, in a very specific order. Blackbeard, Shanks, and the scar that won't heal. And when he starts pulling blocks, One Piece keeps wobbling around that same missing chunk on his face. The 3 scars over his left eye that refuse to disappear. That's not just character design flair. That's Oda putting a permanent post-it note on Shanks's biggest failure. Because as far as we know, that scar isn't from Mihawk or some legendary clash with Whitebeard or a God Valley flashback. It's from pre-Yonko, pre-Devil Fruit Blackbeard, the guy who, at that point, was basically Whitebeard's quiet crewmate with weird teeth. And yet Shanks tells us, very calmly, that Teach gave him that wound, and it still aches. Shanks almost never shows personal fear. He'll stare down a Kainu, flex his haki over an entire battlefield, stroll into merry joys. But when Blackbeard's name comes up, he gets serious in a way that feels almost out of character. Here's an interesting thing: the Whitebeard ship scene. On the surface, it's Shanks trying to save Ace. Noble, mentor-approved, very poster-friendly. But listen to his words. He doesn't just say, "Call Ace back." He says Blackbeard is the one who scarred him, that he misread Teach for years, and that this man is the real danger. It's one of the only times Shanks openly admits, "I screwed up. I didn't see this coming." That's wild for a guy we've been treating like the series' secret project manager. And to be fair, Blackbeard is built as Shanks' perfect antithesis. Shanks is restraint. No devil fruit. Pure haki. Measured moves. 10-year patience plans involving rubber children. Teach is greed speedrun. Hunting devil fruits. Stacking Yami and Gura. Scooping up impel down monsters. Grabbing Whitebeard's territory before the funeral flowers even wilt. Shanks plays the long game. Blackbeard is the guy mashing every button on the controller to see what breaks first. So when we say Blackbeard is the one piece on the board Shanks can't steer, we're not being dramatic. Shanks can negotiate with the Gorosei, intimidate Marines, even nudge other Yonko. But Teach, he keeps doing things that don't fit the system. Who else steals a second devil fruit and survives? Who else turns a single pirate murder into a chain reaction that kills Ace, topples Whitebeard, and rewrites the balance of power? I want to emphasize how personal that scar speculation gets. You can almost picture younger Shanks, fresh off the Roger Pirates, thinking he can read anyone. Then this unassuming crewman he's been vaguely aware of for decades suddenly hits him with something he didn't predict. A blade, a technique, maybe even some freak interaction with the Yami he was chasing, and Shanks walks away alive but permanently corrected. The scar is his body saying, "Your control is not absolute." And from that point on, every Blackbeard power-up tracks with Shanks getting more urgent. Teach nabs the Yami? Shanks starts moving pieces. Teach takes the Gora, builds a massive crew, starts carving up the new world. Suddenly, Shanks is deleting Kid, talking openly about going for the One Piece and treating the final race like a limited-time event. People ask, is Shanks going to die to Blackbeard? To which I say, narratively, that's the nuclear option that would shove the story into its final stage overnight. Because that fight wouldn't just be hockey versus fruits, scar versus teeth. It's curated balance versus unrestrained chaos, a guy trying to retire the pirate era responsibly versus a guy trying to cash it out in one explosive payout. And we're rapidly running out of chapters where those two can coexist. The real question is, when that scar finally stops aching, is it because Shanks won, or because Blackbeard finished what he started? The hidden cost of balance. How many deaths are on Shanks' hands? If we really follow that scar, we end up in a pretty uncomfortable place, because as far as body counts go, Shanks might be one of the deadliest pacifists in the series. Just tally the disasters he orbits. Ace's death, Whitebeard's fall, Blackbeard's rise from annoying schemer to geopolitical nuke, the collapse of the warlord system, the post-Marineford chaos that lets pirates and emperors reshuffle the entire board. Shanks is either on stage, in the wings, or very conspicuously not showing up yet. And to be fair, Oda literally said, when Shanks moves, the story moves. The darker version of that is when Shanks doesn't move, people die. So the uncomfortable question is, could he have stopped some of this if he'd acted earlier and less politely? If that man who casually parries Whitebeard's Bicento with one arm had decided, no, actually, we're not letting Teach cook, back when he first warned Whitebeard, does Marineford even happen? Does Ace ever chase Blackbeard? Or did Shanks, with all that power and all that knowledge, kind of choose the slow-burn apocalypse over the messy preemptive strike? Here's an interesting thing. At Marineford, Shanks walks in late, flexes his hockey, stops a canoe, and then lets Blackbeard walk. This is the same Blackbeard he personally flagged years earlier, the guy whose existence makes his scar throb. People like to say, he couldn't just kill another Yonko on the spot, to which I say, why not at least try to cripple the most obvious future world ender while he's still stabilizing 2 devil fruits and hiding behind borrowed marines? That single choice directly enables everything. Teach does after. The island hunting, the murder tourism, the road poneglyph rush. Shanks doesn't just fail to stop it. He signs off on the timeline. And then there's Luffy. Shanks could have reunited with him at any point in those 2 years. He could have been the Rayleigh who actually shows up for more than a training arc cameo, but he doesn't. He stays as this distant myth, this ideal joy boy has to grow toward without constant coaching. I want to emphasize, that's narratively beautiful and also morally weird. Did he deliberately avoid over-influencing Joy Boy's development, even if that meant Luffy stumbling through Marineford, Impel Down, and Ace's death basically blind? We end up in this moral gray zone. The world government kills to maintain a corrupt system. Shanks allows deaths to preserve a fragile balance that might lead to a better future. One signs Buster Call orders, the other signs off on necessary wars by not stopping them. Film Red is the micro version. Uta is sacrificed, emotionally and almost literally, because her power plus her pain is too dangerous. Shanks chooses the many over the one. Scale that up to the whole planet, and suddenly every corpse in the Great Pirate era is part of his risk assessment spreadsheet. So, if Shanks is quietly playing God with history, are we actually okay with that just because he smiles, drinks, and loves kids? Or should we be a lot more suspicious of the man who decides which tragedies are worth it, and which ones he finally shows up to end? So, whose side is Shanks really on? So here's the uncomfortable pivot. If Shanks is out here doing cosmic risk management, what team does that actually put him on? Because as far as stated factions go, he doesn't fit cleanly anywhere. He's a pirate who can walk into Mary Joaz, a maybe celestial dragon who casually threatens celestial dragons, a Yonko who guards balance more than territory, and a mentor who might also be the guy quietly steering his student into a meat grinder. People like to solve that mess with a clean label. Shanks is the secret hero guarding the world until it's ready. To which I say, sure, that sounds nice on a t-shirt, but let's test it. God Valley origin, baby in a treasure chest, potentially Figarland bloodline, raised by Roger, crying at his execution, then betting everything on Luffy and that fruit. Add Marineford. He ends the war, protects Kobe, saves Luffy. That all screams heroic guardian. Until you remember he also let Ace sail to his death and let Whitebeard walk into an obvious trap. Camp 2 goes, no, he's a covert world government asset preserving their rule. And to be fair, the Gorosei meeting is wild. Private audience, sacred chamber. They address him with a name we don't even get to read. He talks about a certain pirate as a threat to balance. From their perspective, he's basically the world's most useful freelance firewall. But if he's just their dog, why steal the Nika fruit from under CP9's nose? Why raise the future Joy Boy? Why posture against them at Marineford and in Film Red? So we end up with Camp 3, Shanks as a third force actor with his own independent vision. Here's an interesting thing, that one actually fits the contradictions instead of sanding them down. God Valley ties him to the moment the current order was saved. Figarland hints tie him to the people on top of that order. Roger ties him to the previous failed revolution, and then his career is just him refusing to fully side with any of them. Look at the pattern. At Marineford, he doesn't help Whitebeard win. He stops the chaos once the necessary deaths are locked in. With Blackbeard, he keeps trying to prevent Teach from accelerating history too fast. With Luffy, he protects him as a kid, then backs off and waits. With Uta in Film Red, he both shelters her dream and personally shuts it down when it threatens the world. He consistently chooses stability over outright revolution. But he also consistently protects individuals, Luffy, Kobe, Uta, who are likely to reshape the world. I want to emphasize how weird that combo is. It's like he wants change, but only on his terms and on his timetable. That's where the prophecy/promise angle feels less like fanfic and more like the only way this system of choices makes sense. Some inherited idea from Roger about Joy Boy, about the right great war, that says the world has to hit a certain readiness checkpoint before you flip the table. And if that's true, we have to entertain the nastiest possibility. When the final clash comes, Shanks might stand against both the world government and Luffy if he decides they're endangering the correct version of the future he signed up for. Not because he's evil, but because his spreadsheet says, "Nope, you're early." So when push finally comes to shove, what does Shanks choose? His bloodline, his promises, or his own vision? And how much of One Piece has secretly been about that choice, quietly ticking down in the background? The one-armed emperor, Shanks' handicap. That isn't, and all of that ticking time bomb destiny stuff runs into one extremely stupid, extremely important fact. The guy steering it only has one arm, because as far as early One Piece goes, Shanks is not cosmic chess grandmaster. He's dude who gets his arm bitten off by a sea cow with anxiety. That first Sea King scene is framed like pure human vulnerability. No hacky effects, no name technique, just a regular pirate captain who smiles, loses a limb, and tells a crying kid, "It's just an arm." That visual lodged in our brains as, okay, cool mentor, but clearly not built like a monster. He bleeds. He sacrifices. He's mortal. You could almost forget he's supposed to be one of the scariest men on the planet. And to be fair, we carried that image for years. One-armed Shanks sitting in bars, laughing, not fighting. It kind of trains you to think, yeah, he's strong, but there's got to be a ceiling, right? Missing an arm is the most obvious nerf in shonen history. Oda literally drew the handicap in bright red ink. Then Marineford happens, and Oda goes, "Oh, you thought that mattered?" One-armed Shanks casually intercepts Akainu's magma fist, the same fist that just melted half of Whitebeard's face, and the magma stops. No burn, no strain, just a clean block. Pre-war, he clashes with Whitebeard's quake-infused Bicento, splits the sky, and walks away like it was a handshake. Post-war, he shows up late, says, "If you want to keep fighting, fight us." And the entire battlefield, Marines, pirates, warlords, collectively decides, actually, we're good. So what are we supposed to do with that? A man who should be weaker is operating like the final boss's final boss. Here's an interesting thing. The story never once treats the missing arm as a real limiter after that. Nobody says, if only Shanks still had two arms, we'd be in trouble. They're already in trouble. This is where hockey stops being a vague power system and becomes the point. Shanks is Oda screaming, hockey greater than everything. No devil fruit, no robot body, no sword zoo. Just Conqueror's hockey so dense it knocks out half of Marineford by existing, and advanced COC coating implied every time his blade meets someone like Whitebeard, or scares off Greenbull from an entire island away. I want to emphasize how rude that is. He doesn't need the second arm, because the arm he does have is swinging a concept, not a bicep. People say, he can't really be that strong, he's handicapped. To which I say, that's exactly why his feats are terrifying. If this is Shanks visibly nerfed, what does full-capacity Shanks even look like? The handicap is narrative misdirection. Oda lets us underestimate him, so that every time he moves, the gap between what we thought was possible and what he actually does feels wrong. And if the story is already warping around a one-armed Shanks, imagine what happens when we finally see the version who isn't holding back for Luffy's sake, or for anyone's. Hockey monster, what Shanks' feats really tell us? So when we talk about full-capacity Shanks, the manga kind of laughs and goes, "You haven't even seen base model yet." Because as far as on-screen hockey feats go, this guy is already doing things that break the informal power ceiling Oda pretends to respect. Let's just run the canon tape. First time we see Shanks flex post-East Blue, he walks onto the Moby Dick, and his mere presence knocks out a chunk of Whitebeard's crew. These are New World veterans, not random bar patrons. Then his Conqueror's hockey literally cracks Whitebeard's ship when their weapons clash. The anime goes wild with lightning, but the important part is the wood screaming like it's in a horror movie. That's Oda quietly saying, "This is what top-shelf Haoshoku looks like." Marineford doubles down. Shanks shows up late like your friend who forgot the time, casually makes weak Marines faint just by existing, blocks Akainu's magma punch with one arm and one sword, and everyone stops. Sengoku, Garp, Blackbeard, The whole circus? People like to say, well, that's just narrative convenience, to which I say, yes, and that's the point. The narrative is using Shanks as the embodiment of hockey authority. When he says the war is over, the system agrees. And then we have the sky-splitting clash with Whitebeard. Oda reuses that visual later with Kaido and Big Mom, so we know what it means now. This is the visual shorthand for emperors whose conquerors is operating at the absolute top bracket. No devil fruit lasers, no gimmicks, just willpower so dense it physically divides the heavens. Subtle. Here's an interesting thing. When you fold in film red and its adjacent material, the picture gets even more ridiculous. Shanks is projecting his hockey over massive distances to shut down entire battlefields, pressuring admirals without even making proper contact. His crew fights almost entirely through hockey and raw physical skill. No flashy devil fruits, just a bunch of psychos with great core strength and better therapy bills. And to be fair, it's semi-canon, but Oda supervised that portrayal. He's telling you, yes, this is the idea. Then the manga drops Elbaf Shanks on Kid. We watch him use future sight-level observation hockey, read a future where Kid wipes out his allies, and then instantly choose the line of play that removes all risk. One clean, overwhelming strike that deletes Kid's crew from the board. That's not just seeing the future. That's having enough hockey and tactical discipline to make every bad timeline irrelevant. I want to emphasize how rare that combo is. Katakuri can see the future, but doesn't have Shanks' political weight. Kaido has monstrous power, but no subtlety. Shanks is the benchmark for pure hockey. No devil fruit, no cyborg body, no mythical race reveal. Just spirit, skill, and narrative priority. And because as far as One Piece themes go, that matters. The final war can't just be devil fruit hacks versus laser beams. It has to validate the idea that willpower alone can stand next to the most broken abilities in the world. Shanks is the proof of concept walking around in a cape, which raises an uncomfortable question. If the ceiling of hockey mastery is this high, what kind of person did Oda choose to stand up there? The answer gets a lot murkier once you start looking at where Shanks actually comes from, the red hair crew, why a Yonko ship has no devil fruits. And here's where the series quietly flips the Yonko template on its head. Because once you stop staring at Shanks's missing arm and actually look at his ship, you realize something kind of insane. This is a supposed Emperor crew, with 0 confirmed devil fruits. In a world where even house pets are eating Zoans, the red-hair pirates are raw, grass-fed hockey. People will say, we just haven't seen their fruits yet, to which I say, we've seen this crew show up 3 different eras of the story. Crash Marineford, Flex in Film Red, and cameo in the manga's final saga. And Oda still hasn't tossed them a single goofy transformation gag. No accidental fruit reveal, no background guy turning into a giraffe by mistake. That silence is doing a lot of work. Here's an interesting thing about how they actually fight. Ben Beckman doesn't have a power. His power is that everyone in the war, including Kizaru, treats him like a walking OSHA violation. Gun, cigar, brain. Lucky Roo is a ball of momentum who casually body checks a bandit with a pistol to the skull in Chapter 1 like he's playing full-contact billiards. Yasopp is hyped as the sniper who never misses, the guy Usopp is vaguely terrified to live up to. None of that is, I ate the boom-boom fruit, watch this. It's surgical, it's deterrence. These are the dudes you send in when you don't want a Buster Call crater on the map. You just want everyone in a 50-kilometer radius to suddenly remember they left the stove on and go home. I want to emphasize how weird that is next to every other Yonko. Whitebeard's fleet is a devil fruit buffet. Kaido is literally running a Zoan factory. Big Mom hands out powers like MLM samples. Blackbeard is out here speed-running the patch notes on the whole system. Shanks looks at that meta and goes, "Cool, I'm banning items." And to be fair, politically, that's genius. Devil fruits are flashy, but they're also a mess. You can drown, you get hard countered by sea stone, and the government has entire research branches dedicated to cataloging and replicating them. A Haki-centric crew is harder to profile. You can't track a Logia signature that doesn't exist. You can't confiscate someone's fruit if their real weapon is their will. On a practical level, that makes them perfect for sea-based intervention. No weak swimmers, no random jobber getting yanked into the ocean because his paramecia turned his hands into soap. Just a ship full of people who can all, apparently, stare down an admiral and make the sky crack. So Shanks' crew ends up looking less like a traditional pirate armada and more like a Haki Special Forces unit that cosplays as a Yonko. On paper, they're one of the 4 emperors, balancing the seas. In practice, they're a highly mobile, deniable enforcement squad that can walk into Marineford, end a war, and walk out without leaving a devil fruit fingerprint. Which raises a different question. Who exactly benefits from having that kind of independent stabilizer roaming around? And why does the world government act like that's totally fine? Ben Beckman, the smartest man in the room, and Shanks' failsafe. The world government acts like that's totally fine. Unless, of course, it's not Shanks they're trusting. It's the guy standing half a step behind him, smoking, doing the actual math. Because as far as quiet, terrifying competence goes, Ben Beckman is one of the most broken characters in the series, and Oda treats that like it's just, set dressing. We meet him in East Blue, where this man does not even bother to fire his rifle. He uses it as a club. He casually deletes a whole bar of bandits while still looking like he's grading their homework. That's our intro. Vice Captain as bored school teacher of violence. Fast forward to Marineford, and Oda dials that same energy up to insanity. Kizaru, the living embodiment of oops, all photons, is mid-massacre, and Beckman just appears on a mast, cocks a gun, and says, "Don't move." And Kizaru listens. This is an admiral who was trolling Rayleigh 5 minutes ago. People cope by saying, "Oh, it's just gag intimidation," to which I say, "Mate, your gag doesn't stall a top-tier Logia in the middle of the franchise's biggest war. That moment only works if Beckman is an implied monster. Here's an interesting thing. The databooks and SBS don't sell him as strongest shooter or loyal vice captain number 37. They call him the man with the highest IQ in East Blue and one of the smartest in the entire series. Oda keeps framing him as the strategist, the guy who stands next to Shanks during every big negotiation, like at Marineford, and you can almost see the division of labor. Shanks is the vibe, Beckman is the spreadsheet. So when Shanks says these very vague, "we have to stop this era from spiraling" kind of lines, someone has to translate that into actual routes, alliances, and contingency trees. That's Beckman's job. I want to emphasize how much this fits the pattern. Oda loves pairing a chaotic frontman with a grounded brain, and Beckman is that, but scaled to Yonko geopolitics. Now, plug that into the Figarland and God Valley mess. If Shanks really is a celestial dragon by blood, or a survivor of whatever horror show produced a baby in a treasure chest, who do you tell? Not the whole crew. You tell the one person who can handle the information without worshipping you or outing you. Beckman becomes the keeper of the mission statement, what they're protecting, what lines they won't cross, and what happens if Shanks's childhood trauma collides with Luffy's freedom crusade. And to be fair, that's where he stops being just the right hand and turns into a failsafe. If Shanks ever hesitates, torn between preserving the world order he secretly serves and the kid he bet the future on, Beckman is the guy who actually pulls the trigger on the ugly option. He's the one who can shoot the ship, leak the info, or walk away from Luffy if the equation demands it. Which raises a much nastier question. If your moral anchor is also your emergency kill switch, what happens if Beckman decides Shanks himself is the problem? Uta and Film Red, the daughter who exposes the lie. And if Beckman is the kill switch, Film Red is the lab where Oda stress tests what happens when you actually flip it on someone Shanks loves. Because Uta is basically the nightmare version of Luffy's relationship with Shanks. She's the kid he didn't just inspire in a bar once. She's the girl he literally raised on his ship, doted on, pushed toward her dream, and then left on a burning island, believing he'd abandoned her. Her whole core conflict is, my father betrayed me, so I'll build a new world where nobody gets hurt again. Only later do we get the classic Shanks twist. No, he was protecting her and the world by a secrecy, half-truths, and one gigantic morally gray cover-up. Sound familiar? Here's an interesting thing. The exact emotional shape of Uta's story is just Shanks and Luffy with the safety off. With Luffy, he sails away, trusts the kid, and throws him a hat. With Uta, he sails away, lies by omission, and throws her under the narrative bus. She thinks she was sacrificed for the greater good, and to which I say, that's not a side plot. That's a thesis statement about this man's parenting style. And to be fair, Film Red goes out of its way to show you both Shanks at once. On one hand, he's peak anime dad, gentle, patient, carrying baby Uta in flashbacks, standing at the back of her concerts like the proudest divorced father at a middle school recital. On the other hand, when things go bad, he's a terrifying force of nature who can casually coordinate with Kizaru and the Marines, negotiate evacuations, and basically run a joint op with the world government. This is the same guy who walks into the Gorosei's sacred chamber in the manga, and the film quietly reinforces that vibe. Pirate freedom and institutional power hand in hand, like it's totally normal. Oda supervised all of this. He literally said he wanted to explore Shanks's emotional side without locking the canon in place. Because as far as authorial therapy sessions go, Film Red is pretty on the nose. You don't accidentally write, Shanks lets his daughter believe she was abandoned and kind of accepts her dying if it keeps the world safe, unless you're rehearsing something. Uta is the draft version of a future decision. What happens when Luffy's dream of absolute freedom collides with the fragile balance Shanks has been quietly protecting since God Valley? I want to emphasize Uta's tragedy isn't just sad. It exposes Shanks' core flaw. He thinks he's qualified to decide what level of sacrifice is acceptable for peace. If that means breaking the hearts of the people who love him, he'll shoulder the guilt and call it his burden. Noble, right? Or, alternatively, terrifying. So, if he can do that to his own daughter in a side film, what happens when the sacrifice on the table is Joy Boy himself? To answer that, we have to look at where this mess started. A treasure chest at God Valley, a baby, and a name the manga still refuses to say out loud. Shanks and the Admirals. Cooperation, not just confrontation. So, Baby in a Box from God Valley grows up and somehow becomes the guy who can walk into Marine HQ politics like it's his living room. That's not a normal pirate arc. That's a someone stamped your file decades ago arc. Because as far as the public story goes, Marineford should have been Shanks's big "I'm here to throw hands with the world government" moment. Instead, he shows up and negotiates. No grand clash with Akainu, no three-admiral brawl, just end the war right now. And Sengoku, the same man who was ready to sacrifice literally everything to execute Ace, just goes, "Yeah, on your word, we're done." That's not respect for raw power only. That reads like dealing with a stakeholder, with someone who has political capital he's already used before. People like to say, "Well, Shanks is a Yonko." Of course they listened. To which I say, Big Mom was also a Yonko, and nobody was inviting her to the peace talks. The admirals don't treat Kaido like a mediator. They treat him like a natural disaster. Shanks is different. The war ends not on the world government's command, but on Red-Hair's timetable. That is insane if he's just another emperor. Here's an interesting thing from the same scene. Kizaru versus Ben Beckman. Kizaru is mid-light-speed murder attempt. Beckman points a gun, and the man who kicked a supernova through a building just stops. Not wounded, not overpowered, just, "Oh no, it's this guy," and stands down. And to be fair, you can say, comedy beat, Oda loves gags, but the pattern is consistent. The admirals don't show bloodlust toward Shanks's crew. No desperate, "We must capture Red-Hair now." No bellowing orders to sink his ship. It feels like an unspoken protocol. We do not escalate with this particular Yonko unless absolutely necessary. And then, post-time skip, it gets weirder. During the Reverie era, Shanks is moving his flagship in the most heavily monitored waters on the planet, right when the Navy is on maximum alert. Does he get swarmed by battleships? Buster call? Nah. He strolls into a private audience with the Gorosei, a pirate, in the Holy Land, in the room that even most celestial dragons don't casually enter. The manga literally censors the name they call him by. That's not just clout, that's paperwork, that's standing orders. I want to emphasize how bizarre that is. Other Yonko encroach on government space, and you get Marineford-level panic. Shanks approaches, and it feels like a scheduled meeting. Even after Wano, when his crew is flexing new power, you don't see the Navy scrambling entire fleets to box him in. It's like both sides know he's allowed to cross certain lines as long as he doesn't cross the one line. So what's the actual idea here? Shanks as necessary evil makes the most sense. You keep one hyper-competent, politically connected pirate on the board to keep the other monsters in check. He shows up to stop Marineford from turning into a full extinction event. He balances Kaido and Big Mom simply by existing. He maybe even feeds intel or warnings through those back channels. Unofficial asset, fully deniable. If he goes rogue, he's just a pirate. If he plays ball, he's your pressure valve for a world that should have collapsed ages ago. And if that sounds too conspiratorial, ask yourself, who benefits the most from a pirate who can end wars on command and still be blamed for everything when the final secret comes out? The Yonko system, Shanks as the quiet regulator. And that brings us to the uncomfortable reality of the Yonko system. It's not just 4 cool logos on a map. It's basically the world's jankiest pressure valve. The New World is divided into 4 pirate fiefdoms, so no single monster can just sprint to Raftel, grab the one piece, and speed-run the apocalypse. As far as global design goes, it's actually kind of elegant. Big Mom, Kaido, Shanks, and Blackbeard all cancel each other out just enough that the world government doesn't immediately get deleted. But here's an interesting thing. Out of those four, Shanks is the only one who acts like he read the manual. Big Mom hoards souls and kids, Kaido hoards weapons and suicide attempts, Teach hoards devil fruits like a gotcha addict, and Shanks hoards moments. He's the least expansionist emperor by far. We never get the classic tour of red hair territory the way we do with Whole Cake or Wano. No candy tax, no factory network, no giant armada logistics breakdown. For a guy at the top of the pirate food chain, his empire is almost invisible, which is suspicious in a world where Oda loves drawing maps and weird islands. People will say, well, Oda just hasn't shown it yet. To which I say, Oda will spend 10 chapters on a walking, talking lion house, but the crew of the guy who stopped Marineford gets one chill party island and some sake. That's not an accident, that's a priority list. The story keeps framing Shanks' real domain as influence and deterrence rather than land and resources. He doesn't conquer, he appears. Whitebeard's ship, Marineford's bay, Wano's aftermath, staring down Green Bull with pure hockey Wi-Fi. His power is that when he shows up, everyone else suddenly remembers they have somewhere else to be. Because as far as behavior goes, he's the anti-Big Mom and anti-Kaido. Those two are actively chasing road poneglyphs, ancient weapons, and alliances designed to trigger the great war that will engulf the world. Kaido literally announces it like a YouTuber thumbnail. Shanks, meanwhile, is weirdly absent from the road poneglyph rat race on panel. Instead of racing to Raftel, he keeps inserting himself at flashpoints, warning Whitebeard about Ace, trying to head off Blackbeard, walking into Mariajois to talk about a certain pirate. He's not stockpiling doomsday tools. He's managing when and how those tools get used. I want to emphasize how bizarre that is for a supposed endgame contender. The Yonko are framed as rivals in this giant treasure hunt, but Shanks behaves more like the referee who occasionally punches a player. His job in this ecosystem seems to be quietly regulating extremes so the system doesn't implode too early. He nudges Whitebeard away from Ace's rescue, fails, then cleans up at Marineford before Teach can fully hijack the era. He stalls Blackbeard's rise when possible, and when he can't, he at least narrows the blast radius. And to be fair, that sounds way too coordinated for a guy who also cannonballs into party islands, but look at the pattern. Every time the story is about to jump a level in chaos, a red-haired speed bump appears. He's not stopping the final war, he's pacing it. The real question is whose schedule he's following, and what happens when he finally decides the right moment has actually arrived. Ace's death reframed. Did Shanks let it happen? So let's talk about the moment. Shanks stops being the cool uncle and starts looking a lot like the emotionally distant dad of the entire pirate era. We usually frame Marineford as Akainu killed Ace. The world government is evil. End of story. To which I say, sure, but who let the story get that far? Because as far as chain reactions go, this one has Shanks' fingerprints all over it. Roll back to that sake on the Moby Dick scene. Shanks literally sails into Whitebeard's territory, flexes Conqueror's haki so hard the ship gets motion sickness, and says in plain language, call Ace back. He names Teach. He calls him dangerous. He basically hands Whitebeard a spoiler. This guy is not a normal subordinate. He's a walking catastrophe flag. And when Whitebeard refuses, Shanks just leaves. No escalation, no offer to help hunt Teach, no attempt to reach Ace directly. The man who casually strolls into Marineford later can't be bothered to send a scout ship after one hot-headed 2nd Division commander. Here's an interesting thing. From that conversation to Ace's capture, Shanks is a ghost. No interference during the hunt for Blackbeard, no mysterious red-haired ship shadowing Ace, nothing when Ace is transported to Impel Down, and nothing during the entire pre-execution hype cycle where literally every newspaper is screaming, "Fire Fist to be executed." We know he has insane mobility. We know he has intel good enough to intercept Kaido on the way to Marineford. But for Ace, radio silence. And to be fair, you can argue, he can't be everywhere. That's not how this works, which is true on a physics level, and kind of false on a narrative level. Oda's told us explicitly, when Shanks moves, the story moves. The guy picks his moments, like a speedrunner choosing only the cutscenes that matter. The fact he doesn't move until after Ace and Whitebeard are dead is not an accident. It's a choice. Look at his Marineford timing. He doesn't appear when Ace is about to be executed. He doesn't appear when Luffy breaks the platform. He doesn't appear during the first wave of Whitebeard's rampage. He walks in exactly when the war is threatening to spill out of the neat government Yonko box and into full revolutionary chaos. Blackbeard stealing Whitebeard's power, Sengoku losing control, the pirates ready to tear the island apart. Shanks shows up as cleanup crew, not savior. He's there to say, "The balance is restored. Everybody go home." I want to emphasize how dark that reading really is, because it implies Shanks ran the numbers. Ace's death ignites Luffy's growth, removes a future Pirate King candidate, weakens Whitebeard's crew, and accelerates Teach before he's fully ready. It hurts, but it prevents a worse, earlier collapse of the Yonko system and a premature all-out war with Blackbeard at full power. In that calculus, Ace becomes an acceptable loss, including to Luffy. And if that sounds monstrous, good, it should. Because the next question is, who taught Shanks to think like that? And whose world is he actually protecting? The Dark Mentor. How Shanks engineered Luffy's path. Who taught Shanks to think like that? The rude answer is, he did. With Luffy, from day one. Because as far as dark mentorships go, Fuchsia Village is basically the tutorial level where your kindly NPC grandpa is secretly speedrunning you into trauma. Go back to those flashbacks. Shanks doesn't just give Luffy a dream, he gives him hardware and homework. The hat is a literal quest item, the promise is a deadline. And then he does the most suspicious thing of all. He leaves the future Joy Boy in the East Blue, the weakest sea, the kiddie pool. He could have tossed Kid Luffy on the ship like Utah, but instead he's like, No, you stay here, and solo this level 1 zone for 7 years. Why? Because that forces Luffy to learn how to be king of nobodies before he ever touches the Grand Line power system. And to be fair, look how curated that path ends up looking in hindsight. Luffy doesn't just randomly meet some old guy. He meets Silver's Rayleigh, literal Dark King, Roger's right hand, casually hanging out at Sabayudi like a retired DLC boss. Luffy doesn't just learn hockey. He gets a bespoke 2-year course in advanced observation and armament from the man who watched Roger do it first. Then, post-time skip, he keeps bumping into former Roger allies, ex-Rocks affiliates, and every major institution Shanks is invested in, warlords at Alabasta and Marineford, Yonko at Whole Cake and Wano, the government's secret weapons at Enies Lobby and Egghead. Is that just Oda being cute, or does it feel like someone making sure Luffy hits every checkpoint? Because here's an interesting thing. Shanks is always one step sideways from Luffy's route. He's at Marineford, but they don't meet properly. He hears about Enies Lobby, but never shows up. Even after Wano, when Luffy is literally a Yonko, Shanks only decides, all right, time to go for the one piece, the moment Luffy crosses some invisible threshold of strength and notoriety. It's like he's been watching the XP bar and waiting for it to hit Final Saga. People say, well, if Shanks cared, he should have saved Ace, to which I say, that's exactly the point. A light mentor swoops in. A dark mentor lets the anvil fall and then checks if you can still stand. Shanks allows Marineford to happen. He ends it at the last possible second, only after Luffy has been broken on a global stage. Because he needs a captain who understands that the final war will actually kill people he loves. I want to emphasize that's monstrous, but it's also consistent. Shanks sets the course, then steps back, and lets the world beat Luffy into someone who can survive the same kind of catastrophe that created Shanks at God Valley. The question is, whose image is he shaping Luffy into, and whose enemy? The hat, the fruit, and the will? Shanks as curator of Joy Boy. So let's talk about the hat, the fruit, and the guy casually juggling both like he's running a cosmic pawn shop. We've got 3 artifacts orbiting Shanks. First, Roger's straw hat, the visual logo of the series, passed from Pirate King to Apprentice to Rubber Idiot. Second, the Gomu Gomu no Mi, that is absolutely not rubber and absolutely not a coincidence, the Nika/Hito Hito no Mi, model Please Upset God. Third, this big abstract idea the story keeps screaming about, inherited will. Roger hears the voice of all things, laughs at Laugh Tale, can't be Joy Boy, and still chooses to pass the will on. That chain runs from Joy Boy's apology to Roger's dream to Luffy's I'm gonna be king of the pirates meltdown on a bar counter. Here's an interesting thing. For a chunk of time, Shanks is literally sitting on both the hat and the fruit. He's walking around East Blue with Joy Boy's crown and Joy Boy's power in his inventory like it's a side quest. People will say, he just lost the fruit by accident, to which I say, sure, and I just accidentally keep my life savings in a random barrel on a pirate ship. Even if the Gorosei misclassified it, the world government was hunting that fruit for centuries. As far as rare items go, this is not a casual snack. So what is Shanks actually doing? He's holding Joy Boy insurance. The hat and the fruit are 2 keys to the same myth, and he's the guy making sure they don't end up on the wrong head. He's waiting for a candidate whose choices prove they can carry that will without turning the world into one of those dark future spreads where Luffy is broken on Dawn Island and Sanji is basically Judge with better hair. And to be fair, Shanks doesn't just yeet both artifacts at the first loud child he meets. The order matters. He gives Luffy the hat, not the fruit. The hat is a promise, not a power-up. Bet your life on this dream, then we'll see. For a whole year, Luffy is just a kid trying to live up to that symbol. Then fate speedruns the process. Luffy eats the Nika fruit behind Shanks' back. Shanks' reaction is shock, but it's not despair. He doesn't kill Luffy, doesn't rip the fruit back out, doesn't implode like the world government would. He stares, processes, and adjusts. That's recognition. Okay, the dice have been rolled. I want to emphasize, Shanks is curator, not creator. He can't manufacture Joy Boy in a lab. He can only safeguard the symbols and tools until the right person emerges. Once the hat and the fruit land on Luffy, Shanks's job description changes. Phase 1, selection. Phase 2, supervision. Phase 3, the one nobody wants to think about, termination, if the chosen Joy Boy goes full nightmare timeline. Because as far as the story's concerned, someone has to be ready to stop the sun god if the sun decides to burn everything. The real question is whether Shanks is holding that emergency brake for the world's sake, or for someone else entirely, and who he's planning to report to when Joy Boy finally reaches the final island. The Gorosei meetings, what was so dangerous it scared Shanks. So let's talk about the moment Shanks does the most illegal thing you can do in one piece. He schedules a meeting. We cut to Merry Joys, sacred land of dragon cosplayers, and a literal Yonko just walks in. No chains, no admirals, no shoot on sight. The Gorosei sit there like they're meeting an annoying co-worker, not one of the 4 emperors of the sea. They call him in politely, they let everyone else leave, and they let him talk about a certain pirate in private. This is not how you treat your supposed natural enemy. This is how you treat a stakeholder in the system. So, who's the certain pirate? The fandom default is Blackbeard, to which I say, yeah, that's the safe pick. Timing-wise, Teach is exploding in power, collecting fruits like Pokemon cards, and he's explicitly hunting something at sea. Shanks has history with him. He has the scar. He's warned Whitebeard about him. It fits. But here's an interesting thing. If it were just a personal vendetta, Shanks doesn't need a board meeting. He goes and handles it with hockey and trauma. Luffy's the second candidate, and to be fair, this one's thematically loaded. By that point, the Gomu Gomu no Mi's weird government interest is on the table. Shanks is the guy who stole that fruit, and he's been quietly curating Luffy's growth. If Luffy is on a collision course with Joy Boy Event Hard Mode, Shanks might be trying to slow the rollout. But does he really walk into the Vatican of fascism just to say, "Please don't kill my rubber son"? That feels too small. Then we have Buggy, which sounds like a meme, but because as far as narrative chaos goes, he's S-tier. Shanks knows exactly how incompetent Buggy is, which might be the point. A clown accidentally crowned by the world as a Yonko is the kind of systemic instability you actually do warn the elders about. A fraud emperor in a fake balance of power is the sort of vague mess that can trigger wars by mistake. You can even stretch it to Rock's legacy. Some remnant crew, some weapon, some God Valley secret. Shanks was literally found in a treasure chest after that incident. If anyone knows which ghost from that era can break the board, it's him. I want to emphasize what this meeting actually tells us. Shanks doesn't try to solve it alone. He goes straight to the top of the very system he's opposed to and says, "This specific pirate, in this specific moment, is not just my problem. It's a world structure problem. Whatever he's warning about is big enough that acting recklessly could light the fuse on the final war or unleash a power he cannot control, even with all his hockey flexing. So his real fear isn't the government, and it's probably not even Emu. It's an uncontrolled, premature Joy Boy scenario. Sun God awakening in the wrong context, at the wrong pace, turning the dream into the dark universe future instead of the promised dawn. Shanks is willing to collaborate with tyrants to delay that switch being flipped. The question is he buying time to protect the world, or to protect a very specific bloodline and secret from that world? Because the name they almost say in that room might be the real answer. Is Shanks preparing to kill Luffy? So if that almost spoken name in the Holy Land really is Shanks, we kind of have to ask the worst possible question. What happens if the government's favorite red-haired safety valve decides the biggest threat to the world is Monkey D. Luffy? Because as far as track records go, Shanks is already the guy who picks the world over individuals when the scales really tip. At Marineford, he walks in after Ace is dead, looks at Sengoku, and basically says, "All right, reset the system." He doesn't save Ace. He freezes a war before it spirals into full global collapse. With Utah, he literally lets the world believe she's a mass-murdering terrorist to contain the damage of her power. That's not soft dad energy, that's I will emotionally disintegrate myself if it keeps the era stable. And to be fair, he does it quietly, without demanding statues. Here's an interesting thing. That same guy is the one who put the straw hat on Luffy's head and said, "We'll meet when you've become a great pirate." Everyone reads that as wholesome mentor foreshadowing, but if we line it up with what we know now, it starts to sound more like a condition. He'll see Luffy when the variable called Joy Boy probability hits a certain threshold. Not before, not during. At the point where the world either needs him or needs him removed. Look at the timing. Shanks spends decades chilling in the Yonko balance, then after Wano, after Luffy goes full Nika, after the entire world starts whispering about the sun god and that ridiculous white cartoon form, suddenly Shanks is like, "Yeah, let's go claim the One Piece." People say, "Oh, he's just motivated now," to which I say, "Mate, he was on Roger's ship. He's had the One Piece idea longer than Luffy's been alive." The switch flipping right when Joy Boy reappears is not subtle. So what future is he actually planning for? I want to emphasize that Shanks is not a mustache-twirling villain. He's a guy staring at two equally insane timelines. In one, Luffy as Joy Boy breaks the system, frees the oppressed, and the backlash is chaotic but survivable. In the other, that same freedom triggers an apocalyptic counterstrike from Imu, the Gorosei, the ancient weapons, the whole hidden power system we've barely seen, and the world literally burns. If Shanks decides we're sliding into option 2, his role shifts from secret guardian angel to executioner. And that's the nightmare version of their reunion. We all picture the classic scene. Two emperors on a bar stool, clinking mugs, laughing about the hat. But what if that meeting is actually a final assessment? Shanks shows up smiling, tests Luffy's resolve, gauges how much Nika is Luffy, and how much is some ancient will hijacking his freedom. Does he walk away ready to stand beside him in the final war? Or quietly decide he has to stand in his way? Because as far as ominous setups go, nothing's scarier than the idea that the man who started Luffy's journey might also be the last person allowed to stop it. And the real twist is who gave him that job in the first place. The final war forecast, where Shanks stands when the world burns. So when we talk about that job, someone gave Shanks, we're really talking about the casting choice for the final war's biggest wild card. Because while everyone's busy power-scaling Luffy and Imu, the actual tiebreaker might be the red-haired guy who can walk into literally any room in this story and make the music stop. Let's map the battlefield we're sprinting toward. On one side, you've got the Straw Hats, plus their increasingly absurd friend list. Wano, Alabasta, Fishman Island, the Grand Fleet. Probably every random side character Oda remembers the night before. Then you've got Dragon and the Revolutionary Army, whose whole brand is burn Maria Joie down, ask questions later. Add the remaining Yonko crews and big-name pirates, with Blackbeard sitting in the middle like the universe's worst loot goblin. Opposite them, the world government, the Gorosei, Imu, the Seraphim, the whole Justice Industrial Complex. And orbiting all of that, weirdos like Cross-Guild, who are basically a meme that got too much funding. Here's an interesting thing. Shanks has credible ties to almost all of them. Roger's heir in spirit, maybe a Figarland in blood, drinking buddy to Whitebeard, mentor to Luffy, co-parent to Yuta's trauma, and somehow on first-name terms with the Gorosei in their sacred panic room. He's a Yonko the pirates respect, but also the guy the government lets walk into their Vatican and pitch a certain pirate like he's in a board meeting. People say, he's obviously on Luffy's side, into which I say, are we sure he's not on the side of the world doesn't implode in a single week? Because as far as the text goes, his one consistent priority is maintaining some kind of balance. He stops Kaido from crashing Marineford, then stops Marineford itself. He lets the Yonko system solidify. He doesn't rush to claim One Piece, even though he probably could have made a serious attempt. So in the final war, you can absolutely imagine a phase where Shanks is functionally aligned with the government, not because he loves celestial dragons, but because Blackbeard is about to speedrun Void Century 2.0. If Teach is the one who wants pure chaos, Shanks siding with the devils we know to remove him first actually tracks way too well. But I want to emphasize that's temporary at best. The second Luffy's dream of freedom becomes concrete enough that Shanks can judge it, after Laugh Tale, after the true history, he has to pick again. Does he back Luffy to topple the dragons and reshape the system? Or does he become a third force that swings at whoever pushes the world past a livable threshold? And to be fair, that's the real test Oda's setting up. Can Luffy's freedom coexist with a world that doesn't repeat the Void Century's horror? The thing the government was built, brutally, to prevent? If Shanks decides the answer is no, then the last boss of the old era isn't Imu. It's the man who bet his arm on the new one. Which raises one nasty little question we'll dig into next. What does Shanks actually do if the only way to save the world is to kill his own idea of it? The moral ledger. Is Shanks a hero, villain, or necessary evil? So when we ask, what does Shanks actually do if he has to kill his own idea of the world, we're also asking a ruder question. Was this guy ever a straightforward hero to begin with, or did we all just collectively fall for the chill dad propaganda? Because as far as the text goes, his moral ledger looks squeaky clean at first glance. He saves Kid Luffy from a Sea King and literally bets his arm on that future. He walks into Marineford like it's customer service, slaps the big red stop button on the Paramount War, and somehow even Sengoku goes, yeah, okay. He warns Whitebeard about Blackbeard, tries to head off Ace's rampage, protects Utah in his own extremely emotionally unavailable way, and consistently avoids the classic Yonko hobbies of pillaging, random massacres, or what if my island was just a weapons factory? If you only skim that, he's the One Piece HR poster boy. But here's an interesting thing. When you zoom out, the same actions look way murkier. He fails to stop Ace. He doesn't sail to Impel Down, doesn't personally body Blackbeard before Marineford, doesn't blow up the execution platform. He arrives at the end, offers a ceasefire, and walks away from Ace and Whitebeard's corpses. People say, well, he couldn't be everywhere, to which I say, this is a man who can casually appear in front of a Gorosei meeting like he booked it on Outlook. The story frames his inaction as a choice, and, to be fair, that ties into his actual job in the system. Shanks is the Yonko who talks to the Five Elders in a sacred chamber, probably under a name like Figarland something that screams special bloodline. If he really is God Valley royalty, then he's not just a rogue good guy. He's a stakeholder in the exact celestial dragon order that keeps fishmen enslaved and islands nuked. He knows about the Void Century adjacent stuff, knows Luffy is carrying some Joy Boy-coded fruit, and still doesn't sit this kid down to say, hey, by the way, the hat comes with a secret global genocide subplot. He shapes Luffy's path while quietly gatekeeping the worst truths. This is where the necessary evil idea kicks in. Political philosophy loves that archetype, the leader who tolerates small injustices to prevent world-ending catastrophes. That's Shanks more than cool shonen mentor with a tragic arm discount. He'll let Ace die, let Whitebeard fall, keep shaking hands with the Gorosei, if that preserves a fragile balance long enough for his bet on the next generation to mature. It's cruel triage masquerading as laid-back wisdom. I want to emphasize that doesn't make his kindness fake. He is genuinely loving to Luffy, to Yuta, to his crew. Those bar scenes, the laughs, the quiet respect at Marineford, all of that is real. The uncomfortable part is holding two truths at once. Shanks can be a warm, protective father figure on the deck and still be complicit in a monstrous global system when the camera pans out. And that exact moral tension is Oda's favorite toy. So the real question isn't, is Shanks good or bad? It's, what line would he finally refuse to cross? And what happens to the world when he does? The Red Emperor's secret, what Shanks has been hiding all along. And this is where the Shanks discourse usually collapses into secret good guy versus secret final villain, to which I say, you're both kind of right and kind of missing the actual monster in the room. Because as far as the story is concerned, Shanks isn't just a cool Yonko mentor who cries at sake parties. When you stack everything we've talked about, you get something much weirder. Shanks as the world's unofficial custodian, a man raised on Roger's ship, probably born in the God Valley mess, maybe stamped with that Figarland celestial dragon lineage, quietly acting as the safety lock on the entire one-piece system. Here's an interesting thing. All the disparate trivia suddenly line up if you read him that way. Baby in a treasure chest right after God Valley. That's not just tragic backstory. That's a living piece of evidence from the day the world government almost lost control. Potential Figarland bloodline? That makes him both a political key and a walking embarrassment for the celestial dragons. Private audience with the Gorosei in their sacred chamber where they address him by a name Oda literally censors? That's not respect for a strong pirate. That's the board calling in their emergency consultant. I want to emphasize how consistent this is with his actions. No devil fruit on his core crew. Haki supremacy. The guy who proves you can stand at the very top with nothing but willpower and a sword. That's the anti-rocks, anti-ancient superweapon philosophy. Power you can turn off. He steps into Marineford, flexes conquerors so hard that everyone just stops, and the war ends on his terms. He doesn't save Ace, he saves the balance. Ace dies, Whitebeard dies, the old era closes neatly, and the Yonko system survives long enough for the right successor to rise. And to be fair, look at how he curates Luffy's entire journey. He gambles the Nika fruit into the East Blue instead of handing it straight to the world government. He loses an arm to bet on this rubber idiot specifically. Then he spends decades making sure that idiot grows at exactly the right pace, not crushed at Marineford, not recruited by the Marines, not turned into a second Rocks. He's not just raising Joy Boy, he's rate-limiting Joy Boy. So Shanks' real secret isn't just, I might be Figarland, or my haki is busted. It's that he's willing to stand between Joy Boy and the world, convinced that unbounded freedom could burn everything down the same way the Void Century almost did. He's not Imu, but he might be the last person trying to keep Imu's nightmare and Joy Boy's dream from annihilating each other. Which leaves us with the uncomfortable final puzzle pieces we still don't have. What actually happened at God Valley? What the Figarland family was really doing there? What Roger told Shanks that made him cry on the deck? And how all of that explodes when Shanks finally stops custodianship and chooses a side in the climax. Because when that man moves for real, the training wheels come off the world. Threading the needle, recapping the many faces of Shanks. So at this point, saying Shanks is just the cool bar guy who bet on Luffy is like saying Marineford was a small workplace disagreement. We've now stacked so many red flags on this man that he's basically a walking transponder snail alert. Let's thread this whole mess together. First pillar, God Valley. We have a baby in a treasure chest, rescued by Roger right after the most censored event in the series. That already screams relic of the Rocks era, not random West Blue extra. Then you tack on the Figarland stuff from film Red, the celestial dragon aesthetic he kind of accidentally gives off, and suddenly the chest isn't just a gag, it's a vault. He's contraband noble blood, smuggled out of a genocide the history books won't even print. Second pillar, politics. This is the guy who can literally walk into the room where it happens with the Gorosei, sit down, and go, "I want to talk about a certain pirate." And they listen. No cuffs, no admirals, no smug, "you dogs of the world government" speech. Just quiet respect. People like to say, "Oh, it's because he's a Yonko." To which I say, "Cool, where's Kaido's appointment? Where's Big Mom's casual check-in?" Because as far as the story is concerned, only Shanks is allowed to cross that line without the tone of the scene breaking. Third pillar, raw power, the one-armed handicap that isn't. His haki shuts down Whitebeard's ship, scars the Moby Dick, makes admirals flinch, and in film Red, he casually terrorizes a buster call with pure presence. His crew is a no-devil fruit, haki-only nightmare squad, which I want to emphasize is Oda basically yelling, "This is the control group." Marineford, Elbaf hype, all of it quietly scream that if Shanks actually went all out on panel, half the power-scaling videos on YouTube would need emergency surgery. Fourth pillar, the dark threads. He inspires Luffy, sure, but he also nudges him into piracy at the exact moment that will later intersect with Ace, Blackbeard, and the Yonko system he helps stabilize. He stops Kaido from joining Marineford, which sounds heroic, until you remember that a true four-way catastrophe might have broken the world order early. He ends the war, yes, but he also preserves the board. Three great powers intact, world government bruised but not shattered, the next generation perfectly framed. So when we zoom out, what do we actually see? Not cool mentor guy, but a living hinge. 1 foot in Rocks/Roger via God Valley and the treasure chest, 1 foot in the current balance as the only Yonko with a Gorosei fast pass, and 1 foot, yes, he has too many metaphorical feet, in Luffy's coming storm. And to be fair, that leaves us with a much scarier question than who is Shanks. The real question, which we'll tackle next, is, with all that leverage, all that secret pedigree, all that surgical timing, what does Shanks actually want? What does a red-haired emperor want? So if Shanks isn't just cool pirate dad with premium hair, what does a red-haired emperor actually want? Because as far as the story is concerned, every time this man breathes too hard, global politics move 3 squares on the board. Let's lay out the speed run. First, East Blue. He saves Luffy, loses an arm, and literally tells a kid with a 3-brain-cell rubber system, "I'm betting on the new era." That's not just sentiment, that's investment. Years later, he shows up at Marineford, but only after stopping Kaido from crashing the party. He blocks escalation, then strolls into the war like a walking ceasefire button. Time skip, final saga. He has a private meeting with the Gorosei in their sacred room. Then, in the current era, he suddenly decides, yeah, let's move on Bartolomeo and claim the One Piece stage for real. That is not random. Here's an interesting thing. If you stop treating these as isolated hype panels and read them as a strategy doc, a pattern pops out. Shanks protects very specific people. Luffy, the kid with the weirdest devil fruit on the planet. He blocks very specific escalations, Kaido at Marineford, the war itself, and he negotiates with very specific institutions, the literal top of the world government, instead of just punching them. He's not stopping chaos, he's curating it. Some fires he snuffs out, some fires he quietly fans. So what motive fits that behavior? Model 1, Secret Guardian of Balance. In this reading, Shanks is basically the world's conqueror's hockey thermostat. Too cold, and the world government's oppression calcifies. Too hot, and you get Rocks 2.0, and everything melts. He wants a just right level of chaos where his chosen piece, Luffy, can rise without the board flipping too early. Model 2, Celestial Dragon Reformist. If the Figarland theory is right, and he's highborn, then that bet on the new era starts looking less like rebellion and more like controlled demolition. He's not burning Marie-Joie down out of spite. He's slowly unscrewing the bolts so the old system collapses on his schedule, with his replacement ready. Model 3, Roger Idealist. He saw what Joy Boy's return could look like if it's rushed or in the wrong hands, and to be fair, God Valley was probably the worst beta test imaginable. So he's trying to engineer the right Joy Boy scenario. Correct candidate, correct timing, correct world conditions. Model 4, Self-Interested Kingmaker. He doesn't want to be Joy Boy. He wants to be the guy who picks Joy Boy, and, by extension, defines what that freedom actually means. I want to emphasize how much his hockey mirrors this. Shanks doesn't just nuke everyone's will. He selectively deletes who he wants, when he wants. Kids crew off, civilians spared, admirals stalled at long range. His power is overwhelming but precise, and that's exactly how he applies influence to the world itself. Most fans say, Shanks just wants freedom and adventure, to which I say, does a man who micromanages which Yonko show up to which war really sound like a free spirit, or like a curator of acceptable chaos? Because if he's been handcrafting the path to the final war, what happens when Luffy's messy, absolute freedom finally slams into Shanks' carefully edited version of The Right Kind of World? Luffy versus Shanks, Mentor, Gatekeeper, or Final Wall. So when that curated chaos finally collides with Luffy's "I punch the Sky Dragon because I feel like it" philosophy, what does Shanks actually do? Does he clap from the sidelines like a proud soccer dad? Or does he step onto the field and red card his own successor? We all remember the cozy version of this story. Tiny Luffy, tiny village, tiny bandit problem, Shanks laughing it off, betting his arm and his hat on this rubber kid's future. That hat exchange is framed like the purest, warmest passing of the torch in shonen history. But fast forward to the New World, and suddenly that same man is walking into the Gorosei's holy office like it's his living room. The tone shift is wild. Early Shanks is the chill uncle. Current Shanks is the guy who schedules wars and then cancels them when they get too loud. So what happens when they meet again? We basically have three main routes. Version 1. Shanks as pure ally. He shows up, fist bumps Luffy, throws hands with Blackbeard, everybody cheers, Twitter cries. It's clean, it's safe, and to which I say, it's kind of boring. Because as far as shonen structure goes, the mentor figure is usually the bar you surpass, not the cheerleader you keep forever. Version 2 is Shanks as test. Think Rayleigh, but scaled up from Survive Sabayudi to Are you worthy of inheriting Joy Boy's seat without breaking the planet? He doesn't hate Luffy. He stress tests him. Maybe that promised duel over the hat becomes a controlled demolition of Luffy's ego. You want to be Pirate King? Show me you can carry that dream without becoming Rocks 2.0. And then there's the spiciest version, Shanks as final gatekeeper. Not the true final villain, but the last wall between Luffy and the real One Piece truth. I want to emphasize how emotionally nasty that would be, because Shanks is the man who ended Marineford to freeze the board in place, while Luffy is the guy who literally tore himself apart trying to save Ace, consequences be damned. Shanks protects the world from collapse. Luffy protects his friends, even if the world collapses. Here's an interesting thing. That's the same philosophical gap as Yonko balance versus I'm going to be king of the pirates and redraw the map. Shanks has spent years upholding a four-emperor partition of the seas, this delicate power system where nobody moves too fast. Luffy's entire personality is, what if I move too fast constantly? Those ideas cannot coexist forever. So imagine Shanks as a necessary villain, not evil, but the one person willing to stand in Luffy's way to stop a second God Valley-level catastrophe. He's seen what unregulated monsters do when they reach the top. He might decide that even Joy Boy needs a leash. And when that hat finally comes back, the real question isn't, can Shanks beat Luffy? It's, whose dream walks away from that conversation alive? And what secret about the One Piece is worth breaking the kid he raised the world for? The Yonko system he protects, and the world he fears. So let's zoom out from the hat and look at the cage he's keeping it in, because as far as Shanks is concerned, the real main character of the new world isn't Luffy or Blackbeard. It's the Yonko system. On paper, the Yonko are just four pirate emperors flexing in their own oceans. In practice, it's a containment strategy. You take four monsters, draw rough borders, and let pirates police pirates so the world government doesn't get another Rocks-level free-for-all where everyone and their grandma is throwing islands. It's ugly, it's a mess, but it kind of works. Big Mom keeps her freak show in Tato Land. Kaido turns Wano into a weapons factory. Blackbeard hoards powers. Shanks makes sure the whole thing doesn't fall over. Because here's an interesting thing. Shanks almost never acts like a conqueror. He acts like a stabilizer. Marineford is the most obvious example. Kaido moves to crash the war, which would have turned an already catastrophic battle into God Valley 2. World government boogaloo. Shanks intercepts him, stops that collision off-screen, then shows up at the end to hard reset the board. He doesn't grab territory, he doesn't execute Marines, he literally just says war's over, and everyone listens. Fans love to say Shanks is the chill Yonko who just vibes, to which I say, yeah, totally. He vibes so hard, he personally negotiates with Kaido, stares down a Kainu, and then doesn't expand his empire at all. Nothing about that is casual. That's not a guy farming clout. That's a guy doing high-stakes risk management. And if he's a God Valley kid, that tracks. If your earliest memory is legends going off script, Rocks, Roger, Garp, celestial dragons screaming while an island gets erased, you don't romanticize chaos. You grow up with trauma-coded caution. You know what happens when the balance shatters and the monsters stop following their assigned roles. So when Shanks looks at the Yonko system, he's not seeing freedom. He's seeing a barely functional pressure cooker that must not explode. Which brings us to Marie Joie. A Yonko walking into the Holy Land for a private audience with the Gorosei is insane. That's not pirate swag, that's a back channel. The elders treat him with respect. They listen, and Oda even obscures the name they use for him. I want to emphasize how weird that is. Shanks is basically the unofficial pirate representative in a secret peace process. The one guy the world government will tolerate because he keeps the other emperors from kicking over the table. What's he so afraid of? An uncontrolled joy boy who liberates the world overnight and accidentally kills half of it. A second rocks gathering every malcontent under one flag. The void century truth detonating so fast that Imu has to push the global delete button again. His obsession with specific devil fruits, songs like Binks's Sake, and certain bloodlines suggests he's tracking very particular triggers, and if he's the duct tape holding this world together with Conqueror's haki, what happens when Luffy, Blackbeard, and Imu all start pulling in different directions at once? At some point, the stabilizer has to pick a side, and that's when Shanks stops being the safety net and becomes the final problem. The dark trade-off. Who paid the price for Shanks' peace? So if Shanks is the stabilizer, we kind of have to ask the uncomfortable follow-up. What exactly did it cost to keep the world this stable? Because as far as Marineford goes, the timing is almost too cinematic. Shanks walks in like the teacher at the end of a substitute-led disaster class, stops the fight with one sentence, casually blocks a Kainu, and everybody goes, "Wow, hero!" And to be fair, that scene is peak hype, but he only does it after Ace is dead, after Whitebeard is dead, after the symbol of the old pirate era has literally been carved into a corpse on live TV. Could he have intervened earlier? He knew about Ace hunting Blackbeard. He personally warned Whitebeard about Teach. He arrives in time to block a magma punch, but not say to stop the public execution that kicked the war into overdrive. If Shanks is as fast and as plugged in as the story keeps implying, the question stops being, could he? And starts being, why didn't he? Here's an interesting thing. Ace's execution is not just personal tragedy, it's a political broadcast. The world government is saying, we own the narrative. We can kill the Pirate King's son in front of the world. Shanks, letting events snowball to that point, might not be passivity. It might be him accepting that this spectacle has to happen so that something worse doesn't. A controlled burn instead of a world-ending wildfire. One brother on the altar so the whole pirate era doesn't get glassed from orbit by an angry emu. People love to call Shanks the good Yonko, to which I say, good compared to whom exactly? Kaido, who turned Wano into a labor camp. Doflamingo's Dressrosa, where toys are literally disappeared people. O'Hara, wiped out for reading the wrong books. All of that happens inside the balanced system Shanks is helping maintain. The world government still nukes islands. Slaves still exist. Celestial dragons still go human shopping. Stability in practice just means the suffering is efficiently organized. So the picture that starts to form is Shanks playing this ultra-long game. Individual tragedies become acceptable losses as long as the overall transition from Roger's era to Luffy's era stays controlled. That's a very noble Figarland-adjacent way of thinking. It's also the exact opposite of Luffy's brain, which is just, my friend dies? Absolutely not. I will punch God first. And I want to emphasize the bloodline angle here. If the Figarland theory is right, Shanks is literally half sacred noble, half pirate. He understands both boardrooms and bar fights. That makes him uniquely willing to compromise, to sit with the Gorosei to say, I'll let this war run its course, but I'll stop it before it breaks the toy box. Quiet complicity is still complicity, even if it's wrapped in conqueror's hockey. So what are we actually looking at? A tragic hero doing necessary evil so Luffy doesn't have to, or a very well-intentioned gatekeeper standing between the world and real liberation? In the final stretch, that difference is going to matter, and the next piece of Shanks' past might tell us which side of that line he's really on. So, who as Shanks, really, synthesizing the red-haired myth? So let's finally answer the annoying question we've been dancing around. Not, how strong is Shanks, or is he a Figarland? But what job does this red-haired menace actually perform in One Piece's story? Because as far as narrative roles go, Shanks is basically Oda's multi-tool. Origin-wise, he's a living fossil from God Valley, a baby in a treasure chest at the exact moment Rocks, Roger, and the celestial dragons turned that island into a crime scene. Roger doesn't just find a cute kid. He adopts the physical fallout of that catastrophe. Shanks grows up as this paradox, a child of mass trauma raised on the Oro Jackson, absorbing both the horror of the old world and the idealism of the pirate king who ended it. Here's an interesting thing. That's the same tension we see every time he acts. The bloodline thread, Figarland or not, is doing symbolic heavy lifting. Shanks is the bridge between sky dragons and sea devils, a guy who can walk into Mariajoa, talk to the Gorosei in their sanctum, and then go toast with Whitebeard on a Yonko ship. Whether his surname is printed on a Viver card or not, the story treats him like he has dual citizenship in heaven and hell. Politically, that makes him the unofficial fourth pillar. We talk about Marines, warlords, Yonko, but Shanks is the extra-legal statesman duct-taping the balance together. He's the one who negotiates Ace's timeline with Whitebeard, ends Marineford by simply arriving, and gets a personal audience with the world's top boomers. His hockey is terrifying, but his diplomatic leverage might actually be scarier. Power-wise, he's the current ceiling of hockey. A one-armed monster who clashes evenly with Whitebeard, shuts down Green Bull from a country away, and bullies admirals without a devil fruit. Shanks is Oda standing on a table screaming, "The real endgame resource is willpower, not cool laser powers." And to be fair, that's kind of necessary when your main character is a rubber guy whose greatest strength is being stubborn. But I want to emphasize the dark side of that role. Shanks is a benevolent gatekeeper. He protects balance, but that balance includes Ace dying, the Yonko system persisting, and Luffy being nudged into danger at very specific times. His dream is a safe transition between eras, a controlled burn. Luffy's dream is tear the whole thing down and we'll improvise. Those are going to collide. Hard. So the thesis is this: Shanks is not the final villain, not a simple ally, but the red-haired hinge of the story. The man standing between the world that was and the world that's coming, trying to make sure the change doesn't burn everything down. And if that's his job, what does that tell us about One Piece itself? Next, we're zooming out from Shanks to the series-wide pattern he exposes, and what you should actually be watching for in the final chapters every time that straw hat and that red hair share a panel. Reading One Piece. Through red hair, final thoughts, and what to watch next. So once you start reading One Piece through red hair, instead of just Straw Hat, the series kind of reconfigures itself in your brain. Shanks stops being a cool cameo dispenser and turns into a structural warning light. When he appears, the story is quietly telling you, the balance is about to move. I want to emphasize this. Scenes with Shanks are not side content. They're status reports on the world system. God Valley chest baby. That's the origin point of the current balance. Marineford entrance? That's the emergency brake on an era. The Gorosei meeting? That's the world government admitting out loud that this one pirate is baked into their operating manual. So going forward, here's an interesting thing to do as you read. Build a little Shanks checklist in your head. Whenever the balance shifts, ask, where is Shanks? Whenever the Gorosei panic, ask, did he already talk to them, or is he about to? Whenever Joy Boy lore drops, Nika, the drums of liberation, ancient weapons, pause and go, what is Shanks allowing or stopping right now? Because as far as the story is concerned, if the world doesn't collapse immediately, somebody is managing the collapse speed. Revisit Marineford with this lens, and it stops being Shanks shows up to stop the war and becomes Shanks arrives to cap a plan that started at God Valley. Rewatch film Red, and suddenly his overprotective dad act looks like a noble trying very hard not to let a living weapon turn into the next Joy Boy problem. When we finally get the full God Valley flashback, that's probably going to read less like a history lesson and more like the pilot episode of How to Manage a Mythical Liberator in 800 Easy Mistakes. People argue over which Shanks we're actually getting. Guardian of the New Dawn, Gatekeeper for the Old World, Secret Figarland Noble Final Wall for Luffy, to which I say, why not all of the above and a tax audit? Drop your pick in the comments. Which version do you buy? And what's your wildest Shanks theory? Is he Imu's emergency off switch? The government's most important secret asset? The man who decides which Joy Boy timeline we're in? If you want to keep pulling this thread, we've got full deep dives on Joy Boy as a failed futures engine, Imu as the anti-reader, Rocks and God Valley as the pilot season for the current era, and a Figarland/Celestial Dragon breakdown that turns one throwaway name into a whole political mess. That's your natural next step if you're now cursed to see red hair in every panel. And to be fair, we're probably wrong about at least half of this. The next big Shanks move, a clash with Blackbeard, a quiet meeting with Luffy, another polite little chat with the Gorosei, is going to confirm or delete entire hours of theory crafting in a single chapter, and we will be here, losing our minds when it drops. So if you want to be part of that ongoing investigation, instead of just passively watching lore videos in the dark at 3 a.m., no judgment, that's us too. Hit subscribe, throw a like, and join the comments. Because as far as One Piece might secretly be concerned, this isn't just the story of Joy Boy. It's the story of the man who tried to manage Joy Boy,